Schreiber.
Here.
Bruce Larson.
Here.
Kimberly Newton is not here. Deborah Harmon. Here. Laura Lee Thompson.
Lee?
Thinks she's there.
She hasn't logged in yet.
She hasn't logged in yet, okay. Nicholas Sanzone.
Here.
Richard Bankhead.
Here.
Aaron Adams is not here. Kurt Smith.
Here.
Fred Goldstein.
Here.
Barbara Wall Scanlon. Here. Eric Manis is not here. John Windsor is not here. And Charles Venuto.
Present.
And Kimberly, you are now here. We have a quorum.
Approval of the agenda. Has everybody reviewed it, and do I have a first?
I'll first.
I'll second it.
Okay.
Can't. Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody got any? No problems, okay. All right, the minutes to this meeting. Do I have a first? First?
I'll
Okay.
second.
That was Barbara
And Deb.
and Deb. Okay. We have progress and fiscal reports. Queuing you up.
Good morning. So starting at the top, it says we've completed 106 community projects, but the reports have just come in the last week, so we're now at 110 compared to 105 last month. So the 5 new ones are Flounder Creek Stormwater Project, the Titusville Causeway, Offshore Wave Break, Multi-Trophic Restoration Project, the Zoo's North Indian River Lagoon #2 project, one more clam farm, and vegetation harvesting, the county's aquatic vegetation harvesting #2 that's listed that we knew about when we put this agenda together. As far as legislative appropriations, we did receive or were approved for $2.9 million for quick connects to existing sewer lines to convert people from septic to sewer. We completed 1 quick connect this month, 47 septic upgrades, and 1 more leaky lateral sewer repair. Oyster monitoring, the McNabb site in Cocoa Beach, which tried a bunch of different experimental methods for oysters in an area that did not have a good survival rate so far. That project is kind of struggling with 17.9 and 17 live oysters per square meter in the 2 treatments that are reported here. But the Banana River Pilot Project that's down off of Satellite Beach has an average density of 358 live oysters per square meter, so it's doing really well. The Lagoon Loyal website has just transitioned from the old vendor to the new vendor. They're working on more improvements, but the basic website is live, and with a number of warnings to people. The coupon incentive program has been phased out. We're working on other sorts of incentives in the new program. Sykes Creek Zone T septic to sewer project, that construction continues to move forward. You'll see a picture of that later in today's agenda. They're working on both the piping along the roadway and the pump station currently. The Miko septic to sewer project, we've finally made some progress on the as-built, and so working on closeout, and we'll be notifying the other property owners shortly that they can connect to that sewer line. South Beach's O&P is currently advertised out for bid. Any construction contractors out there that want to do a septic to sewer project, that bid opening is July 22nd. Grand Canal muck dredging. When we put this together, we were at 479,000 cubic yards dredged. Now we are at 483,000 cubic yards dredged. That project will be completed with dredging by November 30th of this year, and then the contractor has 90 days to restore the dewatering site at Pineda, so that restoration will be done by February 28th. The Oak Alley muck dredging project, that's been held up while we tried to figure out disposal options. The Board of County Commissioners just approved moving forward with an agreement with St. John's River Water Management District to take the material to a dredge material containment area that they have down in Micco. The memorandum of agreement with St. John's is coming back to the County Commission for approval on Tuesday, and then it'll go to the Water Management District's Governing Board meeting on August 12th. And then hopefully we can award that project and get that one underway. The Titusville Causeway project, although it is technically complete with what was contracted, there's a little bit of erosion at the western end of the project that is not protected by in the lee of the wave attenuation devices. And so stormwater program is adding some of the reef arches. You may have heard about the reef arches. There's an installation down at the Marine Resources Council. And so you'll be seeing some of those up close to the shoreline instead of way out. They're lower profile. We've received a few grant reimbursements and worked on a bunch more reimbursement packages. So thanks to all the finance staff who helped make those happen. And we have one more video that was recorded on the groundwater monitoring. We're awaiting the draft for that for edits. On presentations, Melanie and Brandon have been really busy this month with lots of presentations. And then a whole bunch of staff helped Parks and Rec with the North Area Parks Summer Camp program with a whole day focused on lagoon-related activities. I wanted to note in Florida Today there's a guest editorial by Abby Gehring, trying to set the record straight on muck after some misinformation in the paper lately. So we appreciate that. And under future topics, the first one, state septic and stormwater rules. So we're going to get some on the state septic rules today. We're going to get state stormwater rules at the next meeting. So, we continue to work on these priority topics. And that's my report, Mr. Chair.
The septic rules, what would you expect? Septic rules, you expect them to change greatly?
There have been significant changes lately, and so Anthony Gubler is going to present those to you today.
Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, a few questions. Each month we get this oyster report, and I was talking to Don a little bit about it, and it says, hey, these are doing great, these are doing poorly. As they gather data, are they getting data that can show perhaps where we can predict better oyster growth so we could target those areas?
Yeah.
Definitely, yes.
And so we'll start using that data to say, let's try it here because we know the situation better?
We have been using that data.
But it's just
and
not quite
putting
right.
most of the effort into where they're doing well and then gradually trying to move the population north up the lagoon as the water quality conditions improve and the population improves and there's more natural reproductive capacity. So, when we started, the only live oysters were down there at the Sebastian River, and there was one or two little patches near Turkey Creek, but there were almost no other oysters in the lagoon. And now we have great reproduction in the southern half of the county, and some reproductive effort, all the way up to 520, 528. And so, we're using that data to inform where we can just build habitat, and if you build it, they will come, versus where we need to seed new reefs with live
Before we put
oysters
them
to
in.
help the population area grow.
And I have a couple others on the report. I went to the Lagoon Loyal site, and so it's changed. I tried to download some of my points, and unfortunately they didn't match when I took them from the old one. But it's up there, and you click on it, it says coming soon, so we're going to completely revamp that program, I guess, and then restart it and get people to come back in.
We shouldn't be losing, we don't have Brandon. Brandon, you want to come, or, yes?
Yeah, so we really didn't have people utilizing the coupon system. You know, we were getting one, maybe a month, if that. So it wasn't really an incentive to get people to do and take actions, and people weren't coming back. So there's, we tried a few things last summer with some, like giveaways, kayak trips and things to get people engaged, and some community competitions. So we're looking to sort of shift a little more towards that and try to get these, you know, community events going on rather than just the, you know, individual coupon-driven things. So we're working with them. There's a survey, actually, I think the link for that should be coming out today, or the next few days to the public. We've already surveyed the existing Lagoon Loyal
Right.
members and businesses, and we have it going out to the public now to kind of get their feedback on what they would like to see in the program and what would incentivize them to be involved. And we'll take all that data and then use that to, you know, redirect how we're going to do the program and the website.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to discuss some of that. You may want to work some behavioral economics into that, and there's some real good guidelines around that stuff for,
Yeah, and we have
lotteries,
a
things
team
like
that
that.
is, you know, has the social marketing experience to look at all those different factors. So.
okay, thanks.
Charlie?
Yeah, hey, Virginia, on the Titusville Causeway project, is there any cost impact to adding new reef arches?
Yes, because it's additional work, yes. But there was a budget left in all the grants for the project to cover it.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
When they modeled that, did they anticipate that was going to happen, or did it just show up?
No, that portion of the shoreline was previously armored, and the western edge of the wave attenuation devices is controlled by a channel that we couldn't block. So I think there was just a disconnect between what part of the shoreline was going to be protected by the new structures and what part of the shoreline should retain its old rip-rap shoreline. So more of that rip-rap got removed, but it's now going to be replaced with reef arches, which should be better, so.
Thanks.
Yeah, just a question, that the McNabb Reef is near McNabb Park, I would imagine.
Yes, in Cocoa Beach.
Yeah, and then the other reef, the pilot project, Banana River Pilot Project, that's the one, just a brand-new one, just south of Bonita Causeway, right? It's not, just last year it was built.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Question, Phil? Is there an exclusive provider for those arches, or is there multiple companies that are producing something like that, or is it local?
It's produced down in South Florida, and there is at least one provider who also works in this area. I don't know what other providers they may have contracted with.
I just know it's pretty exclusive.
Fairly new,
Exactly.
yes.
You look like you're just standing there, just waiting to talk.
Scrolling, scrolling. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. So we have received 4.8 million in the April collections, and from conception, the total is 466 million. Okay. And for the monthly financial statement, of the anticipated 516 million in revenue, by the end of the fiscal year, the actuals received so far are 431 million. And for the expenditures this fiscal year, the total assigned to the project and programs is 100 million, and the actual spent is 15.5 million. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, perfect. Thank you. I was prepared, I had my little notes. All right, thank you.
All right. Wow. Moving along good. Have
Do you want to do
have
the
our first
introduction?
speaker.
Do you want to do the introduction?
Yeah, I do. This is going to be Guy Means, Guy Harley as he goes by. He's the state geologist and director of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection's Division of Florida Geological Survey. Earned both his Bachelor and Master's of Science degrees in geology from Florida State University, Gold Seminoles, and is a licensed professional geologist. During his 25-year career with the FGS, Harley has served on the board as a board member or delegate of the multiple organizations, including the Southeastern Geological Society, the Gulf Coast Association of Geological Societies, the Florida Paleontological Society, and currently serves on the Florida Board of Professional Geologists. He also served in multiple graduate student committees and is courtesy assistant scholar scientist at Florida State University. He's given more than 100 invited lectures and presentations on a broad range of geologic topics and has authored more than 70 publications and abstracts. So Harley, you're up.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for that nice introduction. And Virginia, I'd like to thank you as well for giving me an opportunity to present to you all today. So let's try to get this technical thing rolling. I'm going to go ahead and share. I see some heads nodding. Can you guys see my presentation?
Yes, looks great.
All right, fantastic. That's great news. Technology is wonderful as long as it works. Anyway, so I'm Harley Means. I am the state geologist, and I'm the director of the Florida Geological Survey. And as you already heard, that is a division within the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And I have been the director and state geologist for a little more than 3 years, but I have spent my entire career studying the geology of the state of Florida, and I'm as passionate about geology as you all are about protecting your Indian River Lagoon area. So, quick introduction. I will briefly introduce Florida's geology. We'll talk about karst and what it is and how it forms. We'll talk about groundwater flow and Florida's aquifer systems. We'll talk a little bit about aquifer vulnerability. Then we'll sort of zoom in on the Indian River Lagoon watershed specifically. I'll talk a little bit about the surficial geology in your area down there, and groundwater vulnerability and nutrient transport. And then I will be happy to answer any questions you all have. Now, take into consideration, any one of these topics could be a college course, so you're getting a super high level. But hopefully, at least by the end of this presentation, you guys will have at least a cursory understanding of the geology in your area and why it's relevant to what you all are doing. So, the actual peninsula of Florida is part of a greater feature that geologists call the Florida Platform. And you can see from my graphic here, the platform is actually about twice as wide as the current emergent portion of Florida. That platform is comprised of thousands of feet of thickness of limestone, and that limestone was primarily deposited over millions of years in warm marine conditions, and it's comprised of just the countless remains of the organisms that lived in those shallow marine environments over millions of years. The current portion of the platform that is above sea level, which is where we live, has a thin veneer of quartz sand and clay in some places. The western coastline of Florida, right? Can you guys see my cursor if I use it as a pointer? Is that okay with you?
Yes.
Can you see it here? Okay. This is essentially the central portion of the platform, and the oldest rocks that are exposed at the surface in Florida occur right down here in Levy County and parts of Citrus County. So this is what we would call the axis of our platform. And this is a surficial geologic map, for those of you that are not familiar with what these are. Each of the different colors on this map represent a different geologic formation that occurs either at or within 20 feet of the surface in these areas. I'm fond of talking about Florida's topography and how we are topographically challenged in our state. In fact, here's a little factoid for you about our state. We have the lowest high point of any of our states, and that high point is way out here in the Panhandle, almost a stone's throw from the Alabama border. It's in northern Walton County, and we are at an elevation here of about 345 feet above sea level. And if you're so inclined, you can go visit it. You can see the monument here. You can then claim to have achieved greatness by reaching the highest spot, at least natural elevation in our state. So hopefully, everyone in the room, I'm hopeful, has either heard the term karst or has heard about karst features, which we'll learn a little more about here. Karst is simply a type of topography that forms when you've got limestone or some other geologic material that is susceptible to being dissolved away over geologic time. And the topography that forms at the land surface, and all of those features are collectively called karst features. Karst features, particularly here in Florida, include something that all of us are familiar with and have heard lots about, and those are sinkholes. There are numerous sinkholes in the state of Florida, and there are approximately 3, give or take, types of sinkholes. We won't necessarily go into that today, but you guys are in actually a pretty good area for not having the kinds of sinkholes develop that can cause infrastructure damage. Additional karst features include caves. Florida is filled with all kinds of caves. Most of those are beneath the land surface and are water filled beneath our feet. But if you're out in the Mariana area or in some parts of Central Florida, we do have air caves, and some of them are nicely decorated like the ones you see here. Florida also has one of the greatest concentrations of what we call artesian springs. Springs are themselves karst features, but more importantly, what I'd like to point out here is this is world famous Wakulla Spring up here in my neck of the woods. And you note the circular nature of the head spring area here. This is circular, and it's common. If you look at aerial imagery of parts of Central Florida and whatnot, you'll notice real quickly that there are a lot of circular features on the landscape, and most of those are sinkholes. So this actually, the spring, started as a sinkhole like most springs in Florida do, and the reason it's a spring now is because the groundwater level fluctuated. And over time, it came up and was high enough to actually come out and flow over the edge and across the land surface, making it a spring. We also have things like natural bridges and disappearing streams and resurgences. All of those things are collectively called karst features. So how does this karst topography form? Well, as rainwater makes its way through the atmosphere, it picks up carbon dioxide and becomes naturally slightly acidic. And the acid that is formed through this process is called carbonic acid. Once that slightly acidic rainwater hits the land surface and infiltrates, it can become more acidic as it moves through the soil profile. And by the time it reaches the underlying limestone, it's acidic enough it can actually dissolve away some of that limestone, leaving behind void spaces. So, how does this water get into the ground primarily? Well, all of you, I'm sure, are real familiar with how much rainfall we get. We're one of the wettest states in the country. On average, we get more than 50 inches of precipitation a year. However, most of that rainfall, particularly when we have heavy rainfall events, most of that rainfall actually runs off. And it's only a certain portion of that total average annual rainfall that can actually get into the ground and provide what we call recharge to our aquifer systems. And this map here shows the distribution of areas in our state where the upper Floridan aquifer receives most of its recharge. Those are these dark areas you see here. This is where, on average, greater than 10 inches a year of that annual 50 plus inches a year rainfall can make it into the ground to recharge our aquifer systems. Limestone is brittle. If you've never hit it with a rock hammer like most geologists have, take my word for it. It's brittle and it will fracture. And over geologic time, fractures have developed in our limestone bedrock. And the reason that's important is because once a fracture forms, that then provides a preferred pathway for this slightly acidic rainwater to get into and over time enlarge those fractures. So many of the caves and cave systems that I referred to earlier are actually oriented along these linear pathways because they were probably originally fractures in the underlying limestone bedrock. And if you don't believe me, here is an actual example of one. This one was exposed in the bed of the Peace River. When the Peace River dried up, this is probably more than 20 years ago. But anyway, this is a perfect example of what it is that I'm talking about and what these fractures would look like. Our underlying limestone, by its own nature, is also porous and permeable. And as a result, it allows the passage of lots of water. And as that water continues to pass through it over geologic time, it can enlarge and enhance that porosity and permeability. And if you've ever been in a canoe along the upper Swanee River, this is a perfect place to observe this porosity and permeability in our limestone units. Here's another opportunity to see what I'm talking about. This is a limestone quarry up near Gainesville. And you can see that the limestone wall here, the quarry face, is a perfect place to observe. Each one of these is a pathway where groundwater can flow rapidly down into the subsurface. Each one of these features is itself a sinkhole. We would call some of these features chimney sinks. And you can see how this one is actually connected to this area here of enhanced porosity and permeability. This is probably where a former water table stood for quite a while, and that acidic water did its trick and really enhanced the flow or the void space in this zone here. And this is a good representation of what it looks like in the subsurface across most of Florida. So, how do we know where groundwater flows? Well, one way is to look at what we call the potentiometric surface. And the potentiometric surface you can envision is simply, it's the topography on top of the water level in any one of our aquifers. If you were to drill a tightly cased well down into this aquifer, the height to which that water would rise is what we would call the potentiometric surface. And if you look at the distribution of that surface through many wells, you can construct what you see here, which is a potentiometric surface map. And these maps help us appreciate and understand the direction with which groundwater in our aquifers flows. And groundwater flows perpendicular to these lines of equal elevation here. So as you can tell, most of what happens is wherever the groundwater levels are high, the water goes from high to low, and it's flowing primarily towards the ocean. However, I will caution you that these maps are only as good as the data that we have to generate them from. And we could use a lot more data to create more resolute potentiometric surface maps. But these also help us see how the water level in our aquifer systems change over time. Another way to figure out what direction and where groundwater flows once it makes its way into the subsurface is to use techniques like dye tracing. You can inject non-toxic dyes into places where groundwater goes into the ground, and then you can look down gradient to see where you might detect that dye. And that gives you a good idea of, number one, how quickly does that groundwater flow once it makes it into the ground, and once groundwater goes into the ground, where does it actually go? And that's important for many, many reasons. But I'll give you an example here. So if you bear with me, we'll go through this. The area that I'm going to show you is up here. I'm located here in Tallahassee. Just south of Tallahassee is a region we call the Woodville Karst Plain. This is where Wakulla Spring and many other springs are located. But this is also an area where surface water that comes out of the Apalachicola National Forest here, once it hits this karst plain, the karst plain is like a big sponge, and that water that flows along the surface out here goes immediately into the ground through karst features we call sinkholes, but they're special karst features we call swallets. So I'm going to show you real quickly. You'll see over on this map, you should see a red line show up. The red line shows you, number one, where the dye was put in, and then the arrow will show you where the dye was detected. And each one of these that comes up is going to show you how rapidly that dye moved through that system. So in 2002, Fisher Creek, and then we put dye at Fisher Creek, and then it was detected in Emerald Sink. And that's, oop, it didn't show up. Uh-oh. Well, for some reason, y'all, I'm so sorry. My interactive graphic doesn't seem to be wanting to cooperate today. Black Creek is here, and the dye was detected here. What I really want you to pay attention to, though, is not necessarily where the dye was detected, but how quickly that dye was detected over this distance. So 810 meters per day, 2,300 meters per day from Emerald Sink, and now we know Emerald Sink up here is now connected to Wakulla Spring. We know it's connected directly. Kelly Sink is another swallet. You can see how rapidly that groundwater moved. An important one is called Ames Sink. Ames Sink is somewhere, it's right here. And Ames Sink is actually a swallet that takes water from that is primarily runoff from the southern part of Tallahassee. It goes into a lake, and then when water levels are high enough, it runs through a slough and goes underground. We know this water is full of all kinds of contaminants because it is stormwater. So obviously we want to know where that ultimately ends up. And we found out that Ames Sink, the water, once it goes into there, is connected to Indian Spring, and then ultimately Indian Spring to Wakulla. So we know these are now connected utilizing this dye trace technology. Another important thing we did here in my neck of the woods is we were watching Wakulla spring water and the Wakulla River ecology degrade for many, many years. And we were watching nutrient levels increase, much like you guys do where you are. And one of the primary sources of nutrients in this region happens to be the southeast spray field where treated wastewater effluent was being applied to the land surface. So we wondered and wanted to show whether or not they were contributing to the degradation of water quality at Wakulla. So we put dye into some of their wells, and lo and behold, we detected it at Wakulla Spring. So that led to Tallahassee upgrading their wastewater treatment facility, and they went from about 10 milligrams per liter nitrate at the nozzle down to about 2, which was a good improvement. And so we use things like this to help show people, hey, there is a connection here, and maybe we need to think about some upgrades to these kinds of systems. Anyway, again, so what I really wanted to drive home with this is how rapidly groundwater can flow through karst aquifer systems. So what are some of the factors that control how fast that groundwater can flow? Well, obviously the underlying geology is important. In areas where we've got limestone that has lots of porosity and permeability, and the older limestone units have been exposed to the processes of what we call dissolution, which is the dissolving away of the limestone over geologic time. The older units are typically more porous and permeable. The thickness and type of sediment that sits on top of that limestone is important. If you have clay that sits on top of the limestone, the clay can provide you a little bit of protection from the things we do at the land surface, because clay is not very porous and permeable and can sometimes provide sort of a protective layer. Unfortunately, there's not clay over broad parts of the state of Florida where our aquifer system is vulnerable and is right at land surface. The hydrologic regime can control it when we have periods of drought or we have periods of extreme rainfall. Also, the depth to the water in our aquifers can be a controlling factor sometimes. And of course, the things humans do that include, groundwater usage and groundwater pumping can also play a role in the direction and the rate at which groundwater flows. And that also can control the hydraulic gradient. And then our proximity to sea level. Salt water is more dense than fresh water. So as sea level continues to rise, it will continue to infiltrate and push inland against our freshwater resources in our highly permeable and highly porous aquifer systems. And I'll go ahead and admit to you here, this green at Wakulla Spring is actually dye. And we were conducting a dye trace in this region, and I got a rather alarming phone call from the park manager one day. Said, "My spring is green. What are you guys doing?" Luckily, it passed rapidly, and this was a non-toxic dye. But it did make some folks a little worried for a bit. So you heard me talk earlier about aquifer systems. Florida has what we call 3 aquifer systems, and aquifer systems are comprised of aquifers. The one that you guys are probably most familiar with is the superficial aquifer system, because it's the one that gets utilized primarily along the east coast here, and is the aquifer system that's right at the land surface in and along the Indian River Lagoon. However, most Floridians know about the Floridan aquifer system because this is where most Floridians actually get their drinking water. Now, out in the extreme western panhandle region, the Floridan aquifer system actually dives down and is deeply buried, and there are other sediments that contain water that are closer to the surface that are exploited and used as a drinking water aquifer, and we call that the sand and gravel aquifer. Down in southwest Florida, there is an intermediate aquifer system that sits between the superficial and the Floridan. And the further south you go, the Floridan is actually buried deeply, and it's full of saline water. So it is no longer useful as a drinking water aquifer. And all those folks that live down here in southeast Florida get their drinking water from the superficial aquifer system. The Biscayne aquifer is part of that superficial aquifer system. So each one of these areas it doesn't show the distribution necessarily of where these aquifers are. It shows the distribution of where people are utilizing them as primary aquifers. So, unfortunately, as a result of our geology, because our aquifer systems are primarily made out of limestone and other geologic materials that are highly porous and permeable, the groundwater in those aquifers is vulnerable to contamination from the things that people do at land surface. And one of the things we strive to do here at the Florida Geological Survey is to provide relative vulnerability maps so people can see where these areas are in the state where our groundwater is most vulnerable to contamination. And we have developed GIS-based models called the Florida Aquifer Vulnerability Assessment that helps to tease out these areas. We utilize GIS data layers and put them together, and the model runs and spits out a map that looks like this, which is a relative vulnerability map. And you can see here these red areas are areas where the water in the superficial aquifer system is highly vulnerable to contamination, and that's pretty much everywhere in your neck of the woods. So we'll talk a little bit about the geology there, because this is relevant and is the reason why the groundwater in these aquifers is vulnerable. Here is the area that we're going to zoom in on. This was the superficial geologic map I showed earlier, and if you zoom down and look, what you'll see here is this strippled area here is part of the Anastasia Formation. And you've also got some Holocene material here. What these rocks look like are, and I'm sure everybody down there is familiar with the coquina. This is the same material that was cut into blocks and used to make the Castillo de San Marcos up in St. Augustine. And it occurs, along the intercoastal waterway, but it also occurs inland and is in the subsurface. And it's essentially a limestone, but it's just it's cemented sand and shell material that was the result probably of an old beach face. In other parts of your area down there, you've actually got deposits of quartz sand and shell. This would not necessarily be cemented together, so we wouldn't call it a coquina, but this is what the subsurface material looks like, and this is where your groundwater is housed in the superficial aquifer system. So, as I said, the geology can dictate whether or not the groundwater in the underlying aquifers is vulnerable. So in all these areas here where we know groundwater is vulnerable, here is the distribution of septic systems in this region. And I'm sure all of you have seen maps, the distribution of these. Putting septic tanks in areas where our groundwater is highly vulnerable is probably not the best idea. So, what happens when you have septic systems and you apply nutrients to the land surface and it gets into the groundwater? Well, it's not just going to sit there, it's going to move. And it's going to move quickly because of the high porosity and permeability of the rocks that comprise this aquifer system. The water in the superficial aquifer contributes to the water in the Indian River Lagoon. So whatever is in that superficial aquifer water has the potential to influence the water quality in the Indian River Lagoon. As I said earlier, the superficial aquifer in your area is comprised of limestone and quartz sand with fossil shells. It's highly porous and highly permeable. And as a result, this means that the superficial aquifer in and around the Indian River Lagoon is vulnerable to contamination. And I apologize, this number is probably a couple of years old, so I'm hopeful that it is not that big any longer. But, I don't know how many thousands of septic systems you guys have in your area now, but those are contributing nutrients to the groundwater in this area. And groundwater flows from the inland towards the coastal areas and ultimately can get into the Indian River Lagoon. So that was my quick overview of the geology and groundwater in your area. I am happy to answer any questions if you guys have them. I think Virginia has a copy of my presentation. You're more than welcome to take it and use it. And thank you all so much for your attention.
Questions?
Harley, I got a question regarding the use of education outreach materials with some of this information. I know St. John's has got some great maps of the aquifer, even coloring books for kids that talk about how the water flows into the lagoon through the aquifer system. In an effort to better educate the community, do you have some nice maps that you might be able to share that kind of show just how far west the water actually does contribute to the lagoon? Because I feel that some people feel that if they don't live right on the lagoon, that they're not actually impacting the lagoon through groundwater. Whereas, some of us might know that it's actually almost everybody, from 95 where the old sand dune was, that really runs off in that direction. Do you have anything to that point that you might have materials or information that could help better educate them on just exactly how much they contribute?
So if you will go to our website, and let's see, I'm sorry I stopped sharing, but on the final slide in my presentation, we have our website. The FGS does have lots of educational information. I don't know that we have something specifically tailored to the Indian River Lagoon. However, If that would be something useful to you all, I'm sure we could work together to come up with something that might provide you with what you're looking for. So I encourage you to go take a look. If you don't find what you need, please either you reach out or have Virginia reach out, and we'll see what we can do to help you.
Thanks, Harley. I'll reach out. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Mark.
So in areas like ours where we don't have springs, you might have said this and I missed it, but what's the main path of exchange for water out of our aquifer here into lagoon water?
It's probably what geologists call diffuse flow. So it just, it very slowly bleeds out in proximity to the lagoon, or if there are canals and whatnot, the groundwater can bleed out into canals and, streams and rivers that cut their way through these deposits are also potential pathways for this water to flow.
Thanks.
Just to follow on to Mark's question, I know that historically there have been some artesian wells in our area. I know there was a concerted effort at one point to close a lot of those and permit them if they were to remain. Can you tell us what that might look like and if there's any influence there? Because it would not only mean potential nutrient transport, but it could also mean freshwater flow coming into the lagoon that maybe historically was there and isn't any longer.
So if I heard your question right, you were asking about artesian wells in the area and what impact, if any, they might have on the lagoon. Is that what I heard?
Yes, that's the question.
So artesian wells certainly occur across much of Florida, but the artesian pressure and the water is coming from much deeper. So it's not coming out of the superficial aquifer. So when people drill down into the intermediate and down into the Floridan, if that pressure head is higher than the land surface, then you're going to have artesian flow. Typically the water that is in deeper aquifers is certainly of different water quality than the stuff in the superficial. And depending on how deep the well was, it could even be saline. It depends on where the well was. Folks would be great ones to tell you that.
Thank you.
Question, if you don't mind?
Sure.
First, thank you very much for that presentation. It was very, very good. And to follow up a little bit on what Nicholas said as far as how far west it goes, I know you know the geology better than I would, but Palm Bay has a lot, for instance, or Brevard County has a lot of septic tanks, and if a septic tank is not being pumped out on a regular basis and not meeting the treatment, don't we have like a real clay layer, pretty shallow in the Brevard County in some areas, and would that allow that, I guess your word is transmissivity, I think, to go sideways into the ditch and eventually canals into the river? Is that an impact you're looking at, or just the ones near the Indian River Lagoon?
Okay, so a lot to tease out there. We can look at the potentiometric surface and try and tease out whether or not there's a hydrologic divide somewhere that delineates where water would flow once it gets into the aquifer, either towards the Indian River Lagoon or somewhere else, if there is a hydrologic divide out there. Now, my presentation was a broad overview, and it was very simplistic because the superficial sediments that comprise our aquifer, they're not homogeneous. So in other words, it's not the same everywhere. So there are layers that are less permeable. There are layers that are more permeable. And, when the water table is high, obviously, you have to do something different. When you put in septic systems, you have to have a mound system. So what I would tell you is, I can't necessarily generalize about which septic tanks are causing the most potential for pollution. But you are absolutely right. You can't have a septic tank and just stick it in the ground and not ever worry about it. It does need maintenance. Septic tanks were not originally designed to remediate nutrients, right? So I'm hoping I'm getting close to answering some of your questions.
You are, yeah, I just think the focus can be, rather than just right next to the Indian River, some of these factors I know back in the day when I used to work in that field, utilities, for instance, but that was some of our argument to get sewer and water throughout the city, was that we had that issue in the city I was working for. And
Yeah.
a lot of folks said, man, my septic tank works great. I've never pumped it in 30 years. I'm like, yeah, it's not really working great, but but you just haven't noticed it yet. So, yeah, that's some of those challenges we faced. You answered my question, but thank you very much. I think it's an overall look, but I think we're going to need to take a broader look at and focus on where the areas that can directly impact through the canal system, for instance, right? Because everything drains the canal and then it ends up draining to the river. So, thank you very much.
Very welcome.
Fred?
I see a hand up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a great presentation. Thank you very much for that. Do we have, similar to how we monitor various areas for whether it's seagrass, do we have monitoring devices in the aquifer to show nutrient levels at various locations and be able to then use that to track where this stuff is going and show people what's happening?
It is possible to do that. The USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, they're our federal partners. We're the State Geological Survey. That's traditionally been their job, is to monitor groundwater, and we certainly can put devices in wells that can real time give us information about nutrient levels. However, what I would tell you is, it's pretty expensive, and the federal government right now is sort of cutting back on lots of things, and monitoring of groundwater through the U.S. Geological Survey, I know, is one of those things. It can be done. I don't know the extent to which it is being done where you guys are. I know more about it from the perspective of springs up in North Florida, where we were concerned about nutrient levels in springs. So those kinds of devices were installed at spring vents so we could monitor nutrients, but there's no reason why you can't put those in wells and do the same.
Thank you.
Yeah, Fred, Brevard County, they have a system in place. Anthony will probably be talking about it some more here, and that's what the last video we talked
Great. Thanks.
about was about also.
Yeah.
So it is happening.
I'll just add that, our first step was to look at what information was already available, and we reached out to the agencies. There was very little data in this area of the state, so we supplemented, which you'll hear more about.
Thanks.
Short one.
Sure.
Could you comment on the changes on saltwater intrusion?
Phew. I can comment on it from a generalized standpoint. Florida has the second longest coastline of any of the states, and each segment and part of our state is impacted a little differently. What I can tell you is that sea level is rising. Sea level, as it rises, can impact freshwater in our aquifers. As I said, as it moves inland, since it's more dense, it pushes against the freshwater in our aquifers. You can actually have groundwater, rising, but you can also have contamination of the freshwater in our aquifers from saltwater as that encroachment continues. And in Florida, it's not like the Danish, where they can put up a big wall and keep sea level back, right? We live on a sponge. So you can put up a wall, but that's not going to protect you from water coming up through that sponge. So that's the complicating factor here. I wished I could be more specific for you, but all I can tell you is that sea level is rising. It is having an impact. Those impacts are different depending on where you are.
Any other questions, or everybody? Well, thank you very much. Thank
I
you.
can see Laura Lee's hand up. Is that?
Oh, we can't see it. There you go, Laura Lee, go ahead.
Thank you. That was, I was sitting on the COC when you were here several years ago, and your presentation was just as fascinating this time as it was back then. And you've also a couple times have helped me out with some questions. So I really appreciate your assistance and advice. My question is about, so the groundwater from the west side of the Indian River Lagoon, from the mainland, it flows east and it comes up in the lagoon. The groundwater that's under the Kennedy Space Center, does it also flow east and then come up into the Atlantic Ocean, or does it come up in the Banana River, or do you know? Because there is some groundwater contamination at the Space Center. Which way is that contamination going? Thank you.
Laura Lee, that's a good question. What I would tell you is it's probably going both to the east and to the west, depending on where you are, right? So there's some topography on the Cape, and typically groundwater follows topography. So underneath the higher parts, underneath the dunes and whatnot, where you have a little topography, there should be a groundwater divide. So that groundwater divide would then dictate which direction water flowed. But I would say, it probably flows in both directions, depending on where you are on the Cape.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Harley. I think that's it. Everybody's.
Great presentation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for giving me the opportunity, and continue your great work. If there's anything I can do to help, please reach out.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Well, Anthony's going to take this one step further and explain it all to us in terms of septic tanks. Right?
Right. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Anthony Gubler. I'm on the wastewater team with the Sabre Lagoon program. So I'm going to walk us through the septic sewer prioritization that we've done throughout the last 8 years, and also touch on the groundwater performance data that we have, some of the latest, and then I'll quickly touch on the latest septic rules and the changes we've seen most recently. So for the benefit of the public, since we are live, I want to just touch on how a septic system impacts the lagoon. So building off, we'll start with what is a septic system, right? It's a tank in the ground that captures, collects your wastewater from a home or commercial property or industrial property, and then flows into a drain field, which is a series of pipes out in the lawn with got holes in it. The effluent comes out of those holes and percolates through the soil, the sand, potentially some muck and clay layers out west. It builds up a bacterial mat, and that becomes part of the soil treatment unit. So it's that biomat under the drain field that's really processing the waste in a traditional septic system. So conventional septic systems, typically just a concrete tank. We also have two other types of septic systems that are permitted in the state. You have ATUs, those are aerobic treatment units. So those can be designed to either an NSF 40 or NSF 245 standard. So with the baffles put in, aeration included in side, and recirculation of the wastewater, you can create a higher quality effluent. So an NSF 40 will clean up the effluent to a certain degree where you can have more septic systems in an area and reduce potential groundwater contamination for a sanitary perspective. NSF 245 is the standard that requires nitrogen reduction. So with increased recirculation inside the tank, it gives it time for bacteria to work through the nitrogen cycle and process that organic waste that we're putting in there into nitrate. And when that goes in the drain field, it's already worked its way through most of the nitrogen cycle, and the bacteria in the drain field can then finish that cycle and release that nitrogen into the atmosphere. But in Florida, with our sandy soils, no matter which process you take, the third one was the INRB, so the in-ground nitrogen-reducing biofilter. So this is a standard concrete septic tank that flows into a typical drain field, but then we put media layers under the drain field that would allow for more bacteria and bugs to live in there and be more efficient at processing that waste. What we've learned so far is this type of system is hard to permit in Brevard County because we don't have enough depth to groundwater. So that superficial aquifer is too close to the surface, and we need at least 52 inches of separation from where your drain field would be and where the mean high water table would be. So with the exception of a few of the sand ridges, we don't have that space here. But out in Central Florida, there's some areas where they have plenty of space, and they've been installing those. And we are in the middle of a study looking at a couple systems to see if we can improve in the INRB and bring that technology to the county. But regardless of which system you choose, once that effluent leaves the drain field and it enters our sandy soil, it percolates down to the groundwater. And that superficial aquifer, as Harley was teaching us, then flows to the nearest waterway. So if you're next to Lagoon, it's flowing into the Lagoon. If you're next to the canal, flowing into the canal, ditches, whatnot. And so depending on how close those homes are to the lagoon or that waterway, can influence how much effluent or nutrients from the effluent make it to that waterway. So this lower graph shows that as we get closer to a waterway, more of that nitrogen is making it to that waterway. But as you work further, less and less. But we're looking down, we're talking 200 meters away, 600 feet, we're still getting over 5 pounds of nitrogen per year making it to that waterway from one system. So, all right, so we know we have an issue. What is soil doing to help remediate this issue? So we have the septic to sewer projects where we're extending sewer into neighborhoods with septic systems and then connecting those homes. So we're getting rid of that source of nutrient contamination. Our other option would be septic system upgrades. Septic system upgrades is where we replace a conventional system with one of those nutrient-reducing ATUs, and we receive at least a 65% nitrogen removal standard from that upgraded septic system. So obviously, septic to sewer, extending sewer lines is preferable. Remove all the potential nutrient contamination. So why don't we do that everywhere? Well, we have actually now we estimate about 60,000 septic systems in the Lagoon watershed in Brevard County. That's including unincorporated and the municipalities. So when we started the Save Lagoon program, it was estimated about 50,000. Over time, the data, our data set has gotten better. And we also learn more about the potential, all the commercial properties and industrial properties that are also on septic. So that today, we're a little over 60,000 septic systems. So that's a lot of septic systems. And if we were to extend sewer to every developed corner of the county, we're talking multi-billions of dollars. So we don't have that, unfortunately. So we have to prioritize. So the original plan went through this prioritization exercise. The plan, we only had a few weeks to do this prioritization. So we took that these known factors through, there's been decades of research in the nutrient impacts of septic systems and the sanitary impacts of septic systems to local waterways. So we took all those factors, did a prioritization, worked with the cities to figure out where sewer could go, and selected the best projects to move forward with. So this matrix helped us find these hotspots. We looked for the densest hotspots because if we're going to extend a mile of sewer, we want to get as many homes connected on that mile of sewer, right? So if we can only get 100 homes, we're paying for all that money for just 100 homes. Where if we can get 1,000 homes, we're paying the same amount of funding, or it costs the same to put that mile of sewer in, but now we got 1,000 homes. So that cost benefit is a better return on investment. And so originally, we're looking about $20,000 per lot for sewer extension costs. Starting in 2018, we utilized a new methodology to prioritize the septic systems. So this is, we use the FDEP-approved ArcGIS ARC Inlet tool. So this has allowed us to load in a bunch of data sets, groundwater elevations, soil types, all the distances of the lagoon, and calculate the potential impact of all the septic systems in the county all at once. This model was expanded in 2021. So one of the things we discovered in those shortly after utilizing this model was that our data set of known or expected septic systems was incomplete, and we were having people who thought they were on sewer coming forward, realizing they were on septic, and they wanted to utilize our grants to help them, and we didn't have a value. So we expanded the model to be countywide, model each lot, and give it an assumed residential loading value. And also let us get an assumed residential septic loading value for both commercial and industrial properties as well. And then thus, the Lagoon plan was able to utilize as a tool to figure out how to fund those connections as well. We also calibrated this most recent iteration of the model with our local groundwater data. So we put in over 50 wells throughout the county in various different kinds of developments, those developments that are on sewer, developments that are on reclaimed water, on septic, on septic systems, and natural areas. So we were able to take that data and feed it into the model and give it a calibration so it's more locally calibrated to our area. One of the interesting things about running this model was we learned how much influence groundwater or the soil types have on the effectiveness of our septic system treatment. So to your question, there's a large difference between beachside, Merritt Island, as far as how septic systems located in those areas would affect the local waterway. But if we go to Melbourne-Tillman, the soil is way different. There's a lot more organics in the soil. There's those clay layers. So a lot of the effluent from the septic systems there, it's treated to a better quality before it reaches those canals versus on the beach side where you might be on pure sand or coquina rock. And as we just learned, that water flows quickly. There's not much time for the bugs to process that waste. So they're much more impactful. So we use this ARC Inlet model to help further prioritize the projects we can tackle. One of the things that happened in this this time period between the 2018 and 2021, or the 2017 and 2021, was the construction inflation really changed the formula for how effective, how many projects we could accomplish. So it used to be an estimate about $20,000 per lot to bring sewer to each home. Now we're looking at $80,000 per lot. So even our original goal, how are we going to get there if we're seeing the cost increase at that level? So,
Anthony, did you say 20,000 to 80,000?
yes.
Holy smoke.
Yeah. It's a lot of.
Bless you.
We're playing catch up a lot.
Poor Virginia.
Yeah. We all say poor Virginia.
I hate to even say these figures. We looked at St. John's up on Lake Point, say it was
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the average, 80,000. We start getting into some of the constraints that I'll speak to later, we can start looking at 150+ thousand per lot. So it can be a tough to tackle these.
Yeah, this is a tough question, there probably isn't a definitive answer, but how much of that inflation is due to the fact that you have a limited amount of contractors, and this is a gold mine for them, so they just keep raising the price until we say we can't do it anymore?
Yes.
And, you know, it's not just us, right? The spring sheds, you know, as you heard in the previous presentation, right? They were realizing the impact of septic on their water quality, and so there's been a statewide push for septic to sewer, you know, in lots of areas. And so that same number of contractors has got a lot of potential work out there
So it's not
competing
just
with.
total greed, it's supply and demand.
Supply and
As well.
demand, development in the county is also, we're competing against private development as well, and they're putting in sewer systems. So, all right, well, with that conundrum, you know, we need to relook at our cost-benefit analysis, right? So we can still meet our goals. And part of this exercise, we saw that if we truly could, 10%, about 10% of the septic systems in a county contribute about 30% of the septic loading, right? So we know if we can focus on the worst of the worst, we can still make a big dent in that contribution of nutrients to the lagoon. So what we used to have here on Merritt Island is, you know, we had these big chunks of projects where we'd fill in sewer. But now, if we can, since we don't have enough money to do those big chunks, let's focus on some of the particular streets where we will tackle the vast majority of the potential nutrient loading to the lagoon and still meet our financial constraints and our nutrient goals. So that's what the newest plans reflect. And then this prioritization, you know, Sorrel's focusing on that nutrient prioritization, but all the sewer utilities throughout the county, they take that information and then you come from their perspective of how they would prioritize sewer, and we meet in the middle, and that's how we fund these projects that get presented to the COC here. So the cost benefit is the overall method of prioritization, but we also have other limitations as far as what projects are feasible and what projects are not, right? So the county has been sewering all these areas for many, many decades. There's been many iterations of efforts to push sewer through. A lot of what's left without sewer is left on septic because it's very expensive or very hard to bring sewer there. One of the main limitations we're dealing with is on these old neighborhoods, we have narrow right-of-ways. We have to be able to fit a utility, you know, next to the water, next to potentially water or gas in that right-of-way, and within the county's owned right-of-way, and not inside private land. Now, anyone who has dug a hole in Florida knows that as you start digging, it starts collapsing in on you, right? So you already have this very limited, narrow space that you can dig in, and you really can't, you know, go out of it because people are living here. They need to get, you know, waste management through, school buses, emergency services, and their own ingress and egress. So we have to stick inside these narrow right-of-ways, and that's one of the reasons we have taken on some of these alternative technologies, such as vacuum sewer systems or low-pressure force mains. On paper, you know, foot per foot, they might seem more expensive, but when you start looking at what it would cost to dig a 20-foot deep hole in this narrow area, you start realizing traditional gravity sewer may be vastly more expensive than some of these newer technologies. This Anastasia formation, the coquina rock that we have underneath us, is also an issue. So not only do you have the added expense of digging through it, because it's very porous, as I explained, it's got all those fractures and stuff. When we're working near the lagoon and we start digging in and it's below the groundwater level, all of a sudden we have the lagoon rushing in, right? It's just a sieve. And then our expenses for keeping that hole pumped dry so that sewer lines can be placed in go through the roof. So we have to take these limitations into account. And then finally, when you're working these existing neighborhoods, they're usually built out. And if they're not built out, what land is remaining is very expensive on the, from a fair market value perspective. So that is, can be a severe limitation for us, and why some of these projects, it might look like we've been just working and twiddling our thumbs for years. It's actually, we spent a year and a half negotiating land so that we can site the infrastructure that's needed. So that is a big limitation for every jurisdiction in the county. So I was going to touch on this preliminary data we have for this post connection in the Indian River Isles South Central Sea septic to sewer project. So this project went to construction around 2020. We installed gravity sewer in this neighborhood, and we have years of pre-collection data. We could see the total nitrogen values are very dynamic. There's a lot of potential variables that influence what we may be reading, but all these wells were sited downstream of a septic system in this neighborhood. So we have three wells. This vertical blue bar is when that home was connected to sewer. So we can see a marked difference, a dramatic difference between the pre-connection and the post-connection. Not only is it lower, the variability is tightened. So it's looking very positive here. Then again, on the y-axis, most of these peaks are in this 30 to 50 milligram per liter range. So this is important to recognize because every well will look a little different because every home uses, is different. So their signature will be unique to each well. Every one of us uses our home differently with a different number of people in it. We might take a different number of showers, spend more time at work or full time at home. We have to be aware of those things when we compare these different wells. So on this one, our peak is a little over 10 milligrams per liter. So we're looking at 7 to 11 as the peak. So when we get over to this post-connection side, it doesn't look as promising as the previous one, but in actuality, it's at the same range as the previous one. So we're seeing just a overall lower average of nutrients post-connection. Again, we only have about a year, less than a year of data for post-connection versus years prior. So as we collect more data, it will help confirm if we have this continual positive influence on the groundwater here by running sewer and connecting these homes. So this third well, the peaks here are this 20 to 30 milligram per liter range. We don't have as many data points post-connection, but we're still seeing a trend down. To speak to some of these variables that would affect this data, when we're working with homes near the lagoon, we gotta remember that as mentioned by Harley, when there's that the groundwater stages up because there's pressure where it's going to flow, there's pressure pushing back. That saltwater's pushing back. Well, the lagoon, seasonally goes up and down. That's going to affect the elevation of the groundwater in this neighborhood. Also, when we were installing wells, we dewatered the neighborhood. So we dropped the groundwater there below 20 feet so we can install these lines. So that's an effect here. Also, when we connect homes, that biomat that's under the drain field, that starts to die. We just choked off its nutrient source. So that's going to be a signature of nutrients. Another factor is, a plumber can't come through and connect every home at once, right? They work through systematically based on the schedules of the homeowners, working with them. So it'll be kind of spotty as they work through over the year, connecting all the homes. So we have to remember that we're not just seeing the signature of the home that this well is at, we're seeing the whole kind of neighborhoods influenced on the groundwater there. So as we have connected the entire community, it'll also affect the nitrogen signature in each well. So this is just the total nitrogen values. This is all preliminary. Our consultant, Applied Ecology, is still working on analyzing this data. So our annual report will be out in the fall, and they're going to be looking at the other species of nitrogen, not just total nitrogen. And they're also going to be looking at isotopes, and that'll help elucidate all the different kind of trends that we're seeing and what factors might be leading to those. So before I touch on the latest state rules, I was going to touch again on these advanced treatment septic systems, right? So here's a zoomed-in diagram of an advanced treatment septic system. It's got baffles. It's got this plastic media in here that allows bugs surface area to grow on, and so we can get a denser population of bugs in it. We have aeration in here. We have recirculation. So it's designed to really cut down the amount of nitrogen that would be exiting it. So for when we have multiple different kinds of technologies that are allowed to be installed as a nutrient-reducing septic system in the state. We have an incentive system here where if someone were to utilize our upgrade grant and they use a more efficient septic system, they would receive more money than someone who would utilize a less efficient system. Because some are more efficient than others, but they all meet the standard 65% nutrient reduction that is required by both the state rules and SORL.
Just to clarify. So in the first column there after the name of the system, you see that the average total nitrogen reduction varies from 50% at the top down to 85% at the bottom. That's in the tank itself. And then there's another 15% reduction in the drain field, right? So 50 plus 15 is the 65%. That's the state rule and our local code as well. So there's a lot of variability between the performance of the system that just barely meets the 65% reduction versus the top of the line technologies. And new companies continue to demonstrate their technologies and get added to the state's list of approved NSF 245 systems.
And also, these are maintained systems too, and so that improves them too.
Yeah, so they must be installed correctly and they must be maintained. So we work closely with the Department of Health here in Brevard County. So they are in charge of the permitting. So for any of the homes taking part in one of our homeowner grant programs, they notify the Department of Health so that when they're permitting, they make sure it's permitted to meet our 65% reduction. Because it is possible to permit some of these where they wouldn't. If it has too much flow going in, then they won't be as efficient. We're pushing wastewater through too quickly. If the drain field isn't adequately raised above the groundwater, then there wouldn't be enough elevation difference in time, residence time in that dry soil to be given that 15% credit, nutrient reduction credit. So they work with us to be our checks and balances on this. And then we check in with them to make sure that everyone is meeting SORL standards so we can meet our nutrient goals. So there's been a lot of movement on the state rules. So this state 2030 rule, it's been the news, the Nextdoor, the Facebooks, all the phone calls we receive. I'm sure every plumbing company and septic company is receiving the calls from people fearing what that means for them. This is part of the House Bill 1379 that was passed a few years ago. It had put some new standards in for all BMAPs and particularly the IRL BMAP. So as of January 2024, the state would no longer permit any conventional septic system for a new build or modification of an existing septic system, which means that you expanded your house and you had to put in a larger size unit in. However, you were allowed to do a repair permit. In a repair permit, you can do a like-for-like replacement. Something's going wrong, the concrete in your tank is starting to fail, something like that. Your drain field, the biomat has clogged your drain field. You can just put a like for like in, as long as you didn't do anything to lose the grandfathering in of your existing permit. That rule also required that by 2030, though, everyone in our BMAPs here, the North Indian River Lagoon, Banana, and Central, would have to either connect the sewer if it was available or upgrade. Everyone. It didn't tell us how at the time, it just said everyone. In the latest iteration of BMAPs, they put a little more language in, and then as of last week, they reported that starting today, there are no new installations of conventional regardless. So even if you're doing a repair, you're no longer allowed to do a like-for-like replacement of a conventional system. If you gotta do a repair, you have to put in an upgraded ATU. So moving forward today, if you put a permit into their system, you need to put a nutrient-reducing septic system. In other news, we have the court order on septic upgrades or septic system permitting in the North Indian River Lagoon. So it's only to this one BMAP. So that's from 192, the bridge at 192, north to the county line. It does not include the Banana River, and it does not include south of 192, and it doesn't include anything west that would be in the St. John's. So it's particular to this one BMAP. So this injunction prevents any new permitting of OSTDSs in this particular BMAP. There is some nuances that are, I guess, have to be worked out by the legal system to interpret what that means to our permitting. As we understand it, soil upgrade grants may be able to go forward as long as they can be permitted under a repair permit. So if you need to get a new septic system and you haven't built anything around your septic system, you haven't expanded your house, it's potential that you can get a repair permit and they may be able to repair it. But we don't know how it's gonna work yet. We gotta see how it works out. But this was effective yesterday. So anyone who did not get their permit in prior to yesterday is now subject to this injunction and will be navigating a new kind of permitting system until DEP gets a manatee incidental take permit. So, yeah, so that is what I have. Are there any questions?
What's the rough cost difference between the conventional systems and, I mean, there's a range of advanced systems, but what are we talking about?
Like 8,000 extra? It depends. There's a lot of nuance. When where Sorrel's working, we're working with the existing homes, right? So you have already a home, it's been there for decades, you've got trees growing up, and now you need a new septic system. You may have to cut a tree down, find a new place to fit it in your yard. That can drive costs up. So even if you were putting new conventional in, it could potentially drive the costs up. Versus a new build, where it's always going to be lower because you're starting from a blank slate. But we are looking at about an average of $22,000 to do an install of an advanced treatment.
The whole system?
Yep.
Compared to now, 80 plus to get.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the differences that, this current, Sorrel is calculated based on the benefit, on the nitrogen benefits of Lagoon. So with wastewater, we're also bringing in phosphorus, any other potential contaminants. So when we do a sewer extension, we're removing that phosphorus load. We're removing any of the potential contaminants. We're potentially getting far more consistently efficient treatment of wastewater because there's operators looking at it 24/7, 365. You should cheers your local operator because they're working there on Christmas Day while we're enjoying our family. So septic systems, they get checked, these advanced systems get checked out twice a year, but they're not sampled. So there's a particular kind called performance-based treatment system, and that's where the state found the septic system is installed in such a vulnerable area, they do require monitoring. and you have to prove that it is maintaining that standard. But we installed one of these, and it's installed to the state standards, but then the next owner of the house comes in and moves 3 people in each bedroom. It's not legally meant to, you're not meeting your legal obligations, and you could potentially have your permit pulled if the state were to find out, but how are they going to find out? So that's why that extra investment in sewer extension can be worth it.
Go ahead.
That's sort of the last information you shared answered my question as far as like maintenance and who follows up on what that is. Obviously, the advanced has many more components that you're having to check up on regularly. As a homeowner, that investment, I would want to keep up with that my investment was paying off. But is there any follow-up other than what you just sort of said in your last statements to make sure that those treatments or those maintenance schedules are being adhered to? And before you answer, excellent, I would love to see this presentation in an excerpt where it's not just buried in our 3 hours of meeting. Thank you. It was great where you started with the basics of introduction of septic and the historical components. So, and then to answer my question.
Yeah. So you're required to have an operating permit. So the Department of Health will be doing semi-annual checkups to make sure it's plugged in and it's operating, it's operating correctly. And then they will also be checking that you have a maintenance contract. So you have to maintain a maintenance contract with someone who is certified by the manufacturer to maintain that particular system. And so they're checking on to make sure it's being maintained and that it's not being unplugged or you're not ignoring it, the alarm's not going off, something like that. Some of the we've worked really closely with FujiClean because we had a situation come up in the county, so they wanted to come and make sure their system was meeting their performance requirements in the county. So they came, did a town hall for a bunch of the owners of these systems, did their own check as the vendor, and their own follow-ups, because it means a lot to them. And also, they have a warranty on these systems, right? They don't want something happening, and not only is their reputation declining, but they're also on the hook for any potential issues.
And I would venture to say that the homeowner is responsible for that warranty to be intact by the regular maintenance. There would be a clause there, I would guess. Okay, thank you.
It'd be like any other large investment you made, and you had a warranty on it. You have obligations as the purchaser.
And to answer Kimberly's second part of her question, those presentations are all cut out and put on our website. So we have categories that you can go to and look at the different presentations all lumped under there.
Good, right?
Yeah, thanks so much. That's great information. I think I've seen the septic before and the drops, which is fantastic, but that's sort of the point source. What I was getting at in my original question was just the aquifer in general. We see over time an increase in various levels of whatever we're measuring within the aquifer that ultimately over time flows into versus just the point source.
Looks like he might be gone. So, he spoke to the springs because we're looking at the opening to the aquifer. So that's why it's particularly vulnerable. So they're doing all that measurements. I think from it's been a long time since I had Dr. Treffery and Zerillo, teaching me this, but we potentially have much older water in our deep aquifer where we're getting our drinking water. So that's might not be as contaminated or at risk. So that's why he spoke particularly to our superficial aquifer,
Right.
where it is exposed and we are contaminating it. And so we do see a large difference between the natural areas and the areas where we have built up. There is a large difference because we are contributing to the nutrient source. But then speaking to his question, statement about these clay layers and stuff, it varies so dramatically between the different parts of the county. So yeah, you will run into these clay layers depending on where, if you're in an area that used to be low-lying before it was restructured, there's usually a clay layer. So, but in some of the other areas, like the old relic sand dunes, that clay layer might be really deep because it's part of one that was underwater a long time ago. Yeah.
So if what I'm thinking is, typically, Jerry, you said we're gonna drop 100 sensors around here into that superficial aquifer. Are we then gonna see over time, that just in general, get higher levels that ultimately that is flowing through the karst into our waterway?
And I think certainly when we just compare the natural areas to the areas on septic, the areas on sewer, the areas on reclaimed, right, we see a dramatic difference in the water quality. We don't have much historical data to compare, and just the graph that Anthony shared of just 3 homes, you see how variable the data is for those 3 homes that are similar size homes, similar size lots, all on conventional septic, moved to sewer. You've got seasonal changes, you've got fertilizer, you've got people with pets, you've got different irrigation. There's so much variability in each single well. And so even with 45 wells and 8 years of data, it's hard to tease out the kinds of trends that you're asking about, which is why I think we both, compare it to natural, it's way higher than natural. So definitely that's us, that's a signal of us. And it's increased from we didn't used to be here to now we are, to that level of contamination. But, how quickly is it continuing to get better or worse? We can't answer that question.
Thanks, that's great.
Sir?
Yeah. Quick question, how deep are your wells?
They're designed to intercept that septic flow, so they vary depending on the elevation of the groundwater in that area. So it depends.
Yeah, and a little bit for the nitrogen, I know that water is pulled from the superficial aquifer throughout the county, and they test for that all the time, at least once a month, in some cases every couple of weeks. So they probably have a lot of data in the water treatment plants throughout the county.
Go ahead.
Quick, easy one, hopefully. In one of your earlier pictures, when you're talking about the shallow area, was that Merritt Island by any chance?
Talking about this?
Yeah, that one there.
So on the right, this is the Sykes T septic sewer project. So this is actively under construction right now. Be very careful if you go out there. There's active construction.
Pretty point.
The left is, I couldn't find my picture of Castaway Point, so I borrowed one from Yelp.
The reason I asked, I saw the source. The reason I asked was, I'm just kind of curious on where Merritt Island lands in the priority kind of category. You're talking about prioritization.
Oh, yeah.
And I could imagine that Merritt Island being older and having, potentially, closer vicinity to the lagoon, more leakage, and being a higher potential impact of,
You have
nutrients.
Merritt Island's a very interesting case, and what we learned going through this modeling exercise of vulnerable groundwater. So you have very variable soil types as far as these sand dunes, these coquina layers, and also a significant chunk of it that is very at risk of flooding, right, and regularly floods. So these factors are all risk factors for septic system impacts on the lagoon. So we also have a sewer plant with adequate capacity. When we started this project, it was at half capacity. We had plenty of room to work with the plant and keep it efficient. We have a patchwork of sewer infrastructure that we could easily fill in the gaps while also targeting these different places where it's really high loading. And then when we look at the TMDLs, our requirements that we're supposed to meet for reducing nutrients, most of the beachside is sewered, right? There's not much to do in the Banana River Lagoon in bringing sewer from Cape Canaveral to Indian Harbor Beach. But Merritt Island is a significant chunk of Merritt Island that contributes to the Banana River's nutrient loading that we could tackle.
Is it high, low priority list? I mean, I imagine it's pretty difficult with how thin it is to get some work done over there.
Very, yeah, and there's quite a few of those old canaled neighborhoods where septic systems are 20 to 50 feet away from the water. And as Harley was showing, like, it can, when it effluent gets into that coquina formation, it can start flowing quickly through those cracks.
Can you comment on where it is on that list of priority? Is that?
What do you mean by that?
I mean, is it a high priority on like your list of projects to tackle first?
Merit sites compared to the North
Yeah,
Carolina
just in
sites.
general.
So we did it by sub-lagoon because, right, each sub-lagoon has a TMDL, that we're trying to meet. And so that's what Anthony was explaining.
Okay.
And you can't meet it over on the beach side because it's already on sewer, so you're left with Merritt Island.
Okay.
So we could, I mean, it's in the plan, the
Yeah.
cost effectiveness of each one and the loading, so we could do that comparison, but
Yeah, so we've done it on that cost benefit prioritization.
Okay.
It doesn't give the full picture because a lot of these leftovers, especially for these Merritt Island projects, end up being vastly more expensive. And we've had to rely on a lot of state funding to make these projects successful. So Sorrel, it might be very high priority on the cost benefit, but it's because we've been able to supplement with so much state funding, it's kept the Sorrel's cost down. So it's at the top of the list compared to some of the mainland ones where we might not have secured as much funding.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you for all your hard work.
Yeah, go ahead.
If the conversation about that was finished, I believe it was your last slide, third bullet point. If you could define incidental manatee take permit?
That incidental take permit is a permit you have to get for an endangered species because of the harm being brought on by whatever actions were determined to be causing a take. And a take is, the killing or harming of an endangered species.
So it's safe to presume that's not actually going to eliminate and change? I mean, I don't see any incidental take permits being issued in our lifetime for a manatee. I'd like to see it differently. So does that in affect our funding or our projects or anything directly, or is that just incidental that could arise?
So the effect that we're going to see is with our septic upgrade grant program. So that's why there's a may in here in this last bullet where we believe, our guidance has been that if someone qualifies for a repair permit, Sorrel may be able to continue with our upgrades in that area, but only if they qualify for a repair. So there's been, it could be as simple as you put in a paver pathway, but you got within that 10-foot construction setback of your septic system because it's been underground for 40 years. Do you really know where your 10-foot construction setback is? Right? You put it too close, you don't qualify for a repair permit. You would have to get a new, and they are not allowed to issue those as of yesterday.
thank you.
I just have one question. It was towards what you were talking with Fred about, as far as there's also performance measures put on the sewage treatment plants for upgrades and expansions, and how are they doing and keeping up with your septic to sewer upgrades?
Yeah, so we work closely in conjunction with all of the sewer service jurisdictions in the county. So Brevard County, I know, is doing upgrades to all their plants. They're in some level of the process for those upgrades. Melbourne is working on it. West Melbourne's working on it. Palm Bay, we helped fund one of their upgrades, but with the new state rules, they're going to have to go at it again. We helped Titusville fund one of their upgrades. So they are adapting. Rockledge just finished theirs. So yeah, they're keeping on top of it as well.
Good.
Yeah, it's just a much longer process for them. We're talking very dynamic systems, very expensive projects, and the same kind of financial constraints and the contractor constraints that we would see with the sewer projects. It's just magnitudes larger of a project.
Yes. Thank you.
I want to add to the response to Kimberly's question. So this court order is based on, recent court case. So the date, the requirements of this court order, all of that is being appealed by DEP. So, we have no idea how that will work out. But for now, until or unless an appeal changes things, right? These are the requirements. So what that means is any home construction that doesn't have access to sewer is stopped, is blocked, right? Until the state either gets an incidental take permit or the court order changes. The incidental take permit process typically is at least a 2-year process. And the state is not convinced that they could, like you said, get an incidental take permit. And part of that is because you have to prove that you are doing mitigative measures to mitigate the harm. And, how do they do that? So that third bullet is a very, very challenging requirement of the courts on DEP that they're struggling with, how to do that.
That's very significant. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you. That's great.
I'll ask later.
I don't see Tyler in the audience. I see Hope.
Tyler is here, but
Okay,
before,
he's
we're
on.
going to kind of switch gears here
Okay.
and go into clams.
Okay.
And before we do that, I wanted to share a video that we made on the Restore Our Shores clam program, just to give a little historical background on it. So Logan will get that started for us.
Thank you.
Today we are working on monitoring some clams that were placed by the Brevard Zoo in a restoration project.
These sites have been laid out both by the zoo and by UF and collaborators on this project. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of them. And they are looking today to find out how the clams are doing, what their survival rate is, and then how well they're growing.
This project was brought to us by University of Florida. So Todd Osborne approached the zoo almost a year and a half ago and asked whether or not we would be interested in branching out into clam restoration, which we obviously said yes. And this is one of the first sites that they decided to come out and put here in Brevard County. And they put in some big clam beds just to see how the clams would do here.
Any filter feeder has a role in the lagoon's ecology, right? And so we've been used to clear water in the past. That was a function of both the filter feeding community and the seagrasses that help trap those particles. And so clams, just like oysters, are actively filtering water and they're removing particles. And so on one foot, the benefit of restoring clams, just like oysters, is improving water clarity. We put that under the umbrella of water quality, but turbidity is the problem, whether it comes from algae or from inorganic materials or organic particles, whatever the case may be. The amount of sunlight that gets to the bottom is the critical issue for seagrasses.
Brevard County actually has the most riverfront out of all of the counties that border the lagoon. We have quite a few clam beds in here. They're all the way from Titusville all the way down to Mico.
A lot of people don't know, but the Indian River Lagoon is not only the source of the clam industry in the state of Florida, the broodstock for the entire clam industry originated here. The second thing is that in the 70s through the 90s, wild clam harvest in the lagoon was world renowned. I mean, people came from all over the East Coast. Companies came to harvest. Fishermen came from everywhere to harvest here because we had tremendous clam populations. And unfortunately, since 2011, those populations have taken a gigantic dive. So broodstock are the animals that we're going to aid in reproduction in the laboratory. We collected mature adult organisms from the lagoon that had been present, and we can tell that by their age and their size, been present for a lot of these harmful algal blooms, and so we know they're very strong. They're very hard to find. It took us 2 months to locate 39 clams. And you can't look at a clam and tell if it's a boy or a girl, so you just have to take them back to the lab and spawn them. So we call that our broodstock. Those are the parents of all of the clams that we're planting today. Those 39 clams began the program, and those 39 clams produced about 45 million larval clams on our first run at the lab?
The Save Our Indian River Lagoon program is working with many different entities in the community, whether that's government agencies or nonprofits. In the case of this project, we aren't funding it directly, but it is enhancing some of the other projects we do. So we're glad to work with the University of Florida and Brevard Zoo to help alongside of these restoration projects and enhance what we're doing overall.
So this is one of many sites around the lagoon where clams have been able to be put out into the water, and a lot of them are actually in front of homeowners' property where the seed has been released and the clams are out there growing, and as they grow they're filtering the water, but this allows community engagement. So Brevard Zoo had this funding to do this project, and it's a great opportunity for getting the community members involved. They get in the water, they get their feet wet, they are able to dig up in the mud and look at these creatures that otherwise no one gets to see.
So if you want to volunteer or you live on the river and want to get involved, you can go to restoreourshores.org, the volunteer tab, and you can actually sign up for any of our volunteer events. If you want to come out and help us monitor, that'd be great. Or if you live on the river, you can actually sign up to have a clam bed.
Other ways citizens can get involved is they can go to lagoonloyal.com and find out ways they can reduce their excess nutrient pollution that's heading into the lagoon. There's many simple actions that they can take around their own home and in their everyday life that can help improve the lagoon.
Thank you, Terry.
Now Tyler will present on some of the the data.
Tyler, if you'd introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, so my name is Tyler Provancha. I'm a conservation manager with Restore Our Shores, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the takeaways from the first kind of 3 pilot projects that we've done with clams over the past few years. So to start with, just for those of you who don't know, Restore Our Shores is part of the zoo's conservation programs that focus on doing habitat restoration, research, and community collaboration out in the Indian River Lagoon. So I'm going to be focusing on clams today, but I wanted to show off a few of our other kind of programs and kind of an open invitation for me to come back at some point and talk about oysters or seagrasses, because I'm very passionate about those as well, and I would love to share that with you. So this is obviously review. You all know about what the Indian River Lagoon is and where it is and how big it is. I'm sure you've heard it to death. But what I want to focus on is talking about kind of the area that each of these projects kind of encompassed while we were doing them. So I'm going to be talking about the 2021 pilot planting that we did with St. John's, which focuses on 4 different basins. So looking at Mosquito Lagoon, the North IRL, which runs from Haulover Canal to about 192, the Central Indian River Lagoon, which looks at 192 to about Sebastian, and then the Banana River. Both of our 2023 and 2024 clam gardening seasons are more focused in Brevard County, as they were done through the Community Collaborative. So there will just be good to kind of have some context of where these sites are for each of these projects. This is also a review. I mean, we're all here because we're trying to do lagoon restoration and trying to bring it back, but just want to hammer home the point that all of this work with clams is we're not playing with a full deck. You know, there's a lot we don't know. We're dealing with a lot of different discrete and chronic health conditions in the lagoon and how they can actually affect our projects. So to start with, that video that Todd and Hope was talking in gives me a lot of context already for what we did for our first pilot year. So thank you to Todd for all of that. But the 2021 pilot plantings that we did was looking at planting 8 million live clams throughout the lagoon. And that was done in partnership with UF and with funding through the St. John's River Water Management District. And the map on the right there is showing all of our sites. You can see that we span from Sebastian all the way up to pretty far in New Smyrna Beach. All of these plantings were clam, we were using cover nets, so we were planting basically a 10 by 15 net, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, and seeding clams underneath it. And we'll go a little bit more into methods later on for the community collaborative, but a little different. All of these were maintained with the help of a massive volunteer force, as well as that were trained through us and even also went out and monitored with us. We did quarterly monitoring on these projects over the course of them, and a subsection of them, which are actually marked out with in the green on the map, were ones that were planted with seagrass to test some co-restoration questions. And that was led by Florida Oceanographic Society, which they actually have a separate report on that I would encourage you to read about, as it's pretty interesting. So for this project, the planting methods, as I said, were a 10 by 15 cover net that we planted. You can see on the right there us actually laying a net down. We tried to estimate about 8,000 to 10,000 clams per site by using weight measurements, and the whole goal of that was to create an area where they're in the sediment, they're protected from predators, and a lot of literature or projects that have been done in other places are kind of, I've always emphasized that, which I will talk more about in a second. For our monitoring methods, sorry, I'm going to just click forward a few times. So in each of our actual beds that we've done, we put out a 10 by 15 bed, and then we would, at each monitoring, take a randomly selected point 3 times, go through it with a sand flea scoop and sieve it to look at how many live, how many dead clams, and what other organisms were present in the sediment. And that way we could actually come up with a survival ratio and, you know, meet all of like the kind of statistical analysis that we wanted to do. We also recorded point measurements on water temperature and salinity for this project. And this is kind of a timeline of what our program was over the course of it. We started with site surveys in May to August of 2021. The early fall was spent doing the actual trainings with all of the gardeners, making sure that they knew what to expect, what the maintenance schedule was like, setting up ways for them to record data. We then did the actual installations in late fall and early winter, which was followed by our first quarterly monitoring in January to March, followed by a spring monitoring in April to June, and a final monitoring in August to October. And the reason that those are just so spread out is that we had 100 sites to hit, and we had 5 staff people at the time, and a lot of volunteers helping us. So very appreciative of all of the time and effort that went into those. And while my focus of this is really more of data or takeaways, I just want to reiterate that none of this would be possible without volunteer help and the community support. So now to talk a little bit about results. So obviously the goal with these cover net plantings were to protect them from predation, but it is worth noting that when you have a cover net out in the lagoon, some places have higher fetch, some places just have storm events and nets get blown off. And I actually am kind of glad that they did, because it's interesting to see the extent of how different predation actually is. And so you can kind of see here that this is, you know, we're looking at a mean, a max, a minimum, and a median. But I really want to focus on the actual median values, as with predation. If your cover net came off, we would see that it would kind of become an open harvest of clams. There's a lot of different things in the lagoon that actually prey on clams, crabs, crown conch, rays, and it also is going to kind of depend probably by basin as well. So it's, as someone who did some of those installations, it was always very interesting to see if something would blow off even for a few days. You could see a very different picture when you come back to reapply the net. So there's a photo of, you know, somebody had a good lunch. I know this is a lot of information. I'm just going to focus in on a few big takeaways from it, which is looking at some of our point data as well as our survival ratios. The first area that I want to highlight is that salinity was variable in all of the seasons, but it was most stable in spring. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about salinity on my next slide. But to me, that looks like a little bit of a higher mean for spring, and then summer definitely at 30 ppt, which means a little bit more favorable for clams. The next big thing I want to draw attention to is water temperature. So as you can see, it's we had a cold winter, and then we had a very typical summer. And clams do have, they do get thermal shock and thermal stress, and it can actually slow growth rates. So that's something to consider as well. Finally, I want to look at survival ratios, and you can kind of see that we have, I really go off of the mean survival ratios for these, but you know, at 3 months, we're seeing about 80%, and then by summer, we're at about 30%. However, it's site dependent. We're still seeing higher numbers in some of these sites, like our max was a 99% survival. Back to salinity, and this is where the basin kind of stuff that I mentioned before is probably most important, is that different basins have you know, different average salinities, and as a result, we were seeing different percent survivals between them. You can see that the two that have the higher average salinity, Central IRL and the Mosquito Lagoon, had around 50% survival, like cumulative, whereas when you look at things like Banana River and North IRL, which were a little bit lower in terms of salinity, we're seeing in the tens to less than 1%. So kind of coming out of that program, or that first project, we wanted to kind of capitalize on what we had learned from the first set and target those areas that had done well. So the kind of next step was to work with the county to create a gardening program. We already have had an oyster gardening program, and we wanted to kind of tie all of them together under one umbrella with involving the community, and also kind of as a caveat or aside, there's our seagrass nursery in the top right that's also under this with help of maintenance of volunteers. But the kind of idea was that we would focus in on the places that did well, which, as I said before, were Mosquito Lagoon and Central IRL, but obviously Mosquito Lagoon is not in Brevard County, so we focused on Central IRL. And then the other thing that we were hoping to do with this project is to test actually using smaller seed clams. So save money by planting smaller, hopefully planting more, growing them out, and then actually putting them out into the lagoon. So I already said a lot of this, but you know, trying a different method as well. We had done the cover nets, and they had worked well in some places, but didn't work well in others. A lot of the traditional clam farming wisdom, as I know it, you can correct me if I'm wrong, are using the polyester bags, as they are a lot more, they can provide more protection from predation. So we adopted those, and we actually, we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but did a comparison test of those methods in our 2024 year. And so we did our first planting in 2023, 1 million clams. And the number of clams that we had alive by the end of that season was about 1,476, which is less than 1%, which we had a couple challenges that we observed during that period, low salinity and low dissolved oxygen. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it on our next slides. But like I said, we kind of focused all of our planting down into Central IRL. And during that same time, we saw a set of algae blooms in that area. So this data was collected in collaboration with Florida Tech. We have a bunch of continuous water quality sensors that we deploy for different restoration projects, and these were actually deployed for our seagrass plantings that were happening that year. But it's looking at the amount of oxygen that's actually in the water column, so what benthic organisms need to breathe. And you can see in the red kind of highlighted area, we have a peak of dissolved oxygen, and then kind of following it in the first blue section, you see a crash. So all of that that microalgae is producing oxygen, it dies, and then it respires and consumes all of that oxygen. And then the cool kind of thing about this data set is we're looking at 2 different sites in different parts of the Central IRL, and you can see in the second one, you kind of have a delayed signal further north as the bloom kind of made its way further up the basin. So kind of our takeaways were, you know, discrete events matter, but we also think that some of that smaller seed, that 3 millimeter, may have not been conductive for survival. Like they may have had less ability to adapt to those water quality changes. So let's try to go back to a little bit of a larger size for 2024. We also wanted to do a material test to compare the different methods. So we had done 1 year of bags and 1 year of cover nets, and we didn't have a direct comparison. So we decided to do both at a few sites, as well as look at a jute method that some permitters had asked me to test as like an all-natural alternative to some of the plastic. So we just wrapped up that season last December, and instead of less than 1%, we had about 30% survival with 300,000 live clams that we were able to outplant approximately based on our monitoring data. On the right, we have a kind of a figure that's highlighting the change in size over each month, which I think is just cool to acknowledge that consistent growth. We're not seeing any kind of stunting from thermal stress as a whole. Obviously, it may be site dependent a little bit. But to kind of show the results of our material test on that figure on the right, the polyester bags did significantly better than the cover nets at pretty much every single site. And for that, that kind of made us feel confident that in the method that we're currently doing in that way. And my kind of last little part is to just focus on some of the different takeaways that I've had from working with these projects as I was brought in to start with them originally. Site selection matters. In-site conditions are really important, but also just being able to track and understand what discrete events are occurring in each system or each basin. We really have seen better success when doing direct comparisons with polyester bags compared to the mesh cover nets, likely due to the amount of protection that they can provide from predation. And all of these projects that we've done so far, we've only ever done a year of monitoring. I would like to go back and actually look at some of them now and see how these clam populations are doing, you know, post 3 years, post 2 years, post year. And we're currently seeking external funding to try to do some of that work, as I think it's really important to really understand what they're doing post planting. I already thanked volunteers, but you know, I'm just kind of the messenger here. There have been a lot of people who have done a lot of work. Our former senior conservation manager, Olivia Eskandel, put a ton of effort into this program. Our current conservation restoration coordinator, Vaughn Schneider, has done a lot of work as well. And a massive shout out to Hope Leonard, who did pretty much led all of those 2021, those 100 clam sites. Those were her baby. She put a ton of blood, sweat, and tears into it. And most of these slides are even hers. I'm just presenting them to you. And then I just want to highlight, again, just to come back to, it really took a village for all of this, and we would not have been able to do it without all of the partners, all of the volunteers, and everyone who has helped us, as well as Brevard County. So thank you guys very much.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Great job, as always, Tyler. Is there any difference in the uptake of water between clams in the mesh bags and those that you were planting with the cover?
I personally do not know. I would have to look into literature or do some kind of test, but any kind of filtering test is a little difficult to do in a field setting. We would probably have to do something in a lab.
I mean, I got a ton of questions, but I'll try to keep it topical. So you said 30% from 1%. That's really great. For the 30%, how much of those are going to survive to adulthood to be able to spawn and make new baby oysters? Is that enough to where they get old enough where they can start that process?
They already should be, I mean, as I understand that they should already be around that size, but that's what I'm kind of saying about I want to go back out and kind of monitor. In order to track reproductive capability of these things, you have to do a little bit more. You would either have to do a actual like condition study or there's a few different ways to do it, but that's a data gap currently that I would like to look at.
So salinity, temperature, those types of things might impact whether they're going to spawn.
100%, yeah.
And then on the other side of it, you talked about the community and the gardening projects and stuff like that. So is that open to residents, businesses to participate at this point?
Yeah, so It varies year by year. A lot of the places, so the way that our program kind of functions for clam gardening right now is that we raise them in the bags, and then at the end of the project, we will actually outplant them at the site that they were growing, unless that site really didn't seem conductive, and then we'll try to put them at another site that was already kind of permitted. So some of our sites are definitely like we've planted as many clams as we can plant there before we start double planting, so people are always welcome to reach out to us, but it depends on the year.
And they would need a permit to be able to plant?
We do all of that ourselves. So we oversee, we do the permitting, and then they're operating through our permit.
So if I'm a resident, I contact you and I say, hey, I got a property along the lagoon and I want to do that?
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yeah, Tyler is the king of permitting. You do not want to try to do this without Tyler.
In Central IRL, we're not doing anything.
Well, you never know. Yet. Currently central, but.
I think about the fish house project that Todd was working on, where they released 1 million clams with a drone recently. And, you know, the monitoring of that is something that I imagine citizen science might be able to help with, or is that?
I'm not super familiar with that project, so I can't answer that myself, but, I definitely all of our monitorings we had the help of volunteers, so there's always something that someone can do.
Well, again, thank you so much for all the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, it was great, thank you. I'd love for you to come back and talk about the oysters. But I'm doing an oyster gardening now.
Yeah.
And mine have struggled and just about disappeared, but I oyster buddied somebody within 3/10 of a mile of my house.
I heard about this,
for
yeah.
4 weeks, and they have like over 100 within 3/10 of a mile of my house. And I don't know what the difference is, but I would love to figure that out.
For sure, yeah, no, oysters are my bread and butter, so I would love to talk about them.
Great. I'm right across from Ulamay. You would think we got pretty good wave action. I'm not sure if that's doing it, but this was just way back in the canal. And I videoed the bottom, I videoed the fish, the growth. It's completely different than mine.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I just wanted to mention, Hope did bring it up, but south of 192 now is what you're focusing on.
Yeah, that's where we're focused on currently. I mean, there are occasionally times where people reach out to us that are in other places, and I'll hang on to it because there could be a time where we want to try piloting things elsewhere, but at this very moment, we're focused on Central. And, it's always nice if someone reaches out to us for clams or a different project, we can always be like, hey, this site meets our criteria for a different project. Would you be more interested in an oyster reef or a seagrass planting? So there's always a little bit of wiggle room.
Yes. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next we have our local clam farmers that are going to come up, but I also want to share their video. So Logan will play that for us.
We're here in Grant, in the southern part of Brevard County. The Save Our Indian River Lagoon program has teamed up with local clam farmers to plant millions of clams out in the lagoon to not only reduce nutrients, but also filter the water and promote an iconic Brevard seafood. The Save Our Lagoon program recognized clams as a great nutrient reduction tool.
So this program is providing $60,000 for clam farmers to plant 5 million clams in the lagoon.
Those 5 million clams can reduce up to 1,000 pounds of nitrogen per year.
So us as farmers, the way the field side of this business works is we take a clam the size of your pinky nail, roughly 4 millimeters, and we plant it either in the bottom or the substrate or in a nursery bag, and then it takes about 12 to 14 months in order to get to market size. Today we're going out to check one of our lease areas out of the many condensed clam areas that we have here in Brevard County. We're going to be checking our crop, we're going to be pulling some clams, as well as checking for grass and fouling organisms and the overall health of the crop.
The culture gear that's used by these farmers, so the nets and the bags they have laid around the bottom, provide protection for tons of fish and invertebrates. Experienced clam farmers in Brevard can reach out to Brevard County Natural Resources to apply for the program. They've got to have an existing lease or apply for one, Once they get usually a 2 to 5 acre lease, we require that they plant a minimum of 500,000 clams, and they're eligible for $6,000 a year to do this. Habitat assessments are done before these leases are designated, so the clams aren't being planted on top of seagrass or disrupting the natural bottom environment.
This grant helps us put about 500,000 clams in the water per farmer, which is a huge help every year to us. It's a big weight off my back, which encourages me to plant more, filter more water, and grow more clams.
These farmers purchase these clam seeds for 1 cent a piece and then can sell them for 10, 20, 30 cents a piece. It's a great return on investment for the farmers and also the lagoon.
While this program focuses on commercial clam farmers, we also have another program that residents can get involved with. Residents who live along the water can visit restoreourshores.org and click on the volunteer tab to find out if their site is suitable for either clam or oyster restoration. Even those who don't live along the shoreline can get involved, as the Restore Our Shores program needs volunteers to help with maintenance and monitoring of some of these residential clam and oyster sites. Restoring filter feeders like this is just one of the many projects we're doing to help save the Indian River Lagoon. We have over 380 different projects that will be removing over 1.3 million pounds of nitrogen pollution every year.
I am born and raised in Indian Atlantic, Florida. It's everything to me. It's what keeps me farming, is the fact that, you know, as a kid, I loved being in the lagoon. I loved fishing, I loved boating, and so this was a perfect cross for me of being able to work as well as help out our local ecosystem. And every clam counts. You know, every substrate, every bed we put down really helps the lagoon, and it really is. I'm passionate about it, and I love it.
Too much else to say.
Yeah, well. Just hit the button there.
You know,
Go ahead and introduce
Well,
yourselves.
introduce yourself. Yeah, my name's Mike Abdul. I can't thank the guys ahead of us for giving us a nice introduction. I've been involved in clam farming. I was the third person to ever buy baby clams from Harbor Branch back in 1989. And it's been a very interesting opportunity, and now we're getting a chance with your help to help the river more. So, yeah, go ahead.
That's true. My name is Ed Mangano. I am standing here because I decided to go to school for aquaculture and environmental science, and I went to FIT in 1987. I graduated and ended up working at Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute on a economic feasibility study of growing hard clams in the Indian River Lagoon. And when that project ended, I started up a clam farm that is 6 miles south of Ocean Avenue, which I keep seeing here like flashing back because I haven't been there very often for a long time, but it's at Hog Point where they've done a lot of the replanting here, the Brevard Zoo and Todd. So I've worked at Harbor Branch, then I started that clam farm up, worked there for years, started another company, a clam packing house for the farmers, and then started a clam nursery and started field planting in 1998. And I've pretty much been doing it for almost 38 years now. So that's why I'm standing here. Well, I guess we're here because of the program, which ended or got used, and we're hoping that we'll continue that to help us to get through the hurricanes that we've had, the extreme super blooms that have really knocked us back. So that little bit of money helps us, but more importantly than even helping us old farmers here is helping the new, hopefully younger generation of clam farmers, which will continue on. I just turned 60, so I'm like trying to do it as long as I can. But like Nick, you saw up there, who's here, and there's several people that sublease on our farms and are getting started into clam farming. And for them to be able to buy 500,000 seed and plant it, and it's a big risk. So to have that possible $6,000 returned for the seed and for bags. It just might help the program,
Yeah, my son
People get
actually,
involved.
who's a chef in Chicago, just got his AQ license last week, and he's gonna be coming down to, I have 2 leases on the river, and he's gonna run one of them. And he's the same age as next year, so one's 38, so it is kind of, I'm really glad he's interested.
But I think we've seen like a lot of everything that I was going to say. The environmental benefits of clam farming, I think you probably all heard several times and over again. The clams will pump about, at adult size, 4 gallons a day, excuse me. And if you're planting 1 million clams, that's 4 million gallons of water a day getting filtered. It takes from the nursery stages, which from our nursery to the final harvest, it takes about 16 months. And during that time, they're filtering the whole time. So that's a very good benefit, as you know, and that's why we're here talking about funding it. In that 16 months, not only are they filtering the algae to help the sunlight penetrate, to help the seagrasses, but they're also taking up the nitrogen, as several of the speakers have talked about, in their tissue and in their shell. And what we do is, of course, the animals also get to reproductive age before we harvest them, so they will spawn into the environment, and those larvae will travel miles and miles to all sorts of parts of the lagoon, depending on wind direction and currents. So there's the added benefit of that also. So we're also, when we pull them out of the water and actually harvest them so they get to the markets, we are removing the nitrogen that is tied up in the shells and in their tissues. So that's the environmental end of it, but we can hit a couple slides there just to. So that's a.
I'm sorry, I'll go back.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, that's just one of our boats and our clam spring. But that's, our nursery is there on the left. We have about 10 upwellers at one site, and those upwellers, we contract out hatcheries. We have some from Harbor Branch. We have some from up in the Whitney lab for the restoration projects, but we also have our farm-raised clams where we contract out hatcheries from our broodstock that we send them to be spawned, and then about after spawning, we get the clams down at about 500 microns. They're put into our systems. These particular systems have 18 silos and 4 trays in each silo, but this system can handle over 100 million animals a year, even more, but we usually shut down for the summer. They'll handle about 100 million animals. They get from 0.5 millimeter to about 4 to 6 millimeter, and that's the size they go into the nursery bags. Not sure, so you can tell me that.
I actually am a customer of Ed's because there's not too many people doing it. But we buy 4 to 6 millimeters clams. That's the picture where you have the quarter is on your left. We put those into a soft mesh bag because it reduces the predator factor significantly. Back in the 80s and 90s, we were using a plastic, we would call it an ADPI bag. And what was happening is with the mesh, the baby crabs and the baby hawks, anything can't just crawl in there. We were, at some point in time, we were raising the biggest stone crabs you're gonna get. We put 500 clams in the bag and get 3 stone crabs this big, and there was nothing but shell left inside. So Brian Duvall, who was in this business, he was one of the first people to get involved in this. He went to this soft mesh bag, so the predator can't, we still get them, but they don't have a place to just live and walk around like in a buffet. You know what I mean? They're not living in their own, thing. So then what we do is we make these bags. These are a couple of guys who work for me. We go ahead and set up and this is, you can see the soft mesh bag. We put about 10,000 clams per 4-foot bag, and then we reduce the density as they get bigger. When we plant our clams, we plant them, we use a grid system that has, in the future slides, you'll see some other different techniques. So each one of these is, I put 3 bags in a belt. It's easy to handle, it's easy to control, and they just love it. I mean, they're very helping. I do have clams here if anybody would like to see them. I have the 4 millimeters, I have 5 millimeters, and we have the replants that we just got from the program last year, which are getting up to about the size of a nickel.
So here we have, this is just off of Mullet Creek on one of our leases. We have clams that are plantable size. They can either get put into bags, soft bags like Mike is talking about, 4x4, which we do use, or they can get planted under bottom nets. This is a bottom net here down. We usually run them about 10 by 50 feet. After about a month, they get the growth on them, which again is another great environmental factor because it has plant life that just starts to grow off of the mesh material. And in that plant life are crabs, juvenile crabs, juvenile fish, and a whole ecosystem. And it just brings the barren bottom, which is the only bottom we're allowed to have is barren bottom. So now it's just created this whole like little ecosystem there, which is really interesting to see. Then this is the fun part, I always call it. 12 months later, if we haven't had hurricanes or super blooms and predators haven't done their damage, we go out, we use a rope, and we have knots, and we tie a bunch of bags together, and we lift them with a mechanical winch because we're all getting too old to horse them up on ourselves. And then here's just a picture of our boat, the Anticipation, which has a winch on the front of it, pulls up the clams, and we just dump them into baskets, and that's just our day out harvesting clams. And you can see the clams, those are about 12 months old there in a good year, which was actually last year. They then go to the packing plant. They go through a tumbler, we call it, which is all machinery we made, so that if there are any half shells in it, they fall through the tumbler. Any sea life, there's plenty of crabs that come in with them, and other tunicates and sea squirts, and we try to take them all, put them in a bucket, and get them back to the lagoon. Everything we can, we try to bring back. We call it the bucket of life.
If you happen to notice on the slide to the right, how the white lip is on a lot of the shells, that's a really good indicator of how healthy the river is, how much food is in the water, and the clams basically grow about the same number of cells every day, but when they're 4 millimeters, they look like they grow really, really fast, and when they're big clams, you wish they grew faster. So
those have been growing very fast, those there, yeah. So then they go to the grading machines, and then they end up in your pot at home, hopefully. So that's just a sample of our product and the process that it goes from beginning to end there, at least for us. And if you have any questions? All right, thank
Sure,
you.
Don, I got one for you guys.
Okay.
What's the real estate like out there, Ed? If someone wanted to get into this?
There's a
there
lot,
plenty?
there is leases available. There are a lot of leases available. You just have to apply to the Department of Ag. It's all online. It's a very simple procedure. If you're going for a new lease in a different area that is not in a high-density lease area, you can mark off an area, and the state will come out and do a survey of the bottom to make sure there's no seagrass. We just applied for an area, and there was actually some seagrass in it, and we got denied, which was fine, because I've got plenty to do. But there is areas available, especially down just north of the inlet and south of Mullet Creek.
So when you're creating all this habitat, how often do you actually stimulate an area that might grow seagrass because of the increased activity, and then you kind of grow yourself out of a lease? Does that ever happen?
Well, it hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
So, but, if it happens, that might not be a bad thing.
Great.
Because then we'll move to another lease, and hopefully it'll do it again.
Thanks so much for helping to filter the lagoon.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
So where could one buy your clams locally?
Well, we have a seafood market. It's in Sebastian, though, just across the bridge, Indian River Seafood Market. They're there, but a lot of we mostly do, we sell to distributors like New England Fish, Direct, I can't even name a whole bunch of them, but the distributors then supply markets and restaurants.
What about seed clams?
Seed clams, well, that's That's mainly what Orchid Island Shellfish does. We get those clams to a hatchery, they spawn them, they send them down, and then we grow them up and we do sell them. And
Because I did that. I got 20 years, 25 years ago, I did that at my house.
Uh-huh.
And I got them from Clayton's.
Oh, yeah.
I got a
Yeah.
5,000, and I put the net down, and they did fine until the '04 hurricanes. And that wiped them out, and I never redid them. But
Well,
now
yeah.
I'd like to do it. I just think it would help the lagoon.
Sure.
And, you know, it's just a fun thing
I
to
think
do.
you gotta talk to Tyler for the permitting. But yeah, we'd love to supply you the seed. Yeah, we just give you the seed to put out there. It's not a lot, you know. But for farmers, we do sell it. But if, you know, small projects and stuff, we,
So how do I, well, I'll get with.
yeah, you can get in touch with us. We're around. We've been there. I've been there 38 years.
You said you brought clams?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, if you want to show those. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Stick around, stick around.
While he digs out show and tell, do you want to do the vote for Laura Lee to be able to vote on the business items?
On the first one, the clam,
Well, just on business items in general.
on the old business?
Remote vote. Before you get to new business,
We gotta do old business. Right?
yeah.
I don't
Yes.
think we have any
But at
old.
any time in the agenda, you could have a vote to allow Laura Lee to vote.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that.
Oh, that's what you want, okay. Sure.
A second.
Okay. All in favor?
I think the
Aye.
best way we do this is just pass it to my right, and then these are different sizes. These are the clams.
So Laura Lee, you
and
can
these are
vote.
Approximately 3 months old. Now, the faster growers are in the next bag.
That wasn't quite.
And those are the ones that would get bumped up. And then that's what a market size is. You'll notice on the clams, there's like rings on the clams, and those are actually growth rings. Because like in the winter, if the water's cold, there's not a lot of food in the water. And then when the spring comes, you'll see like a spurt. It'll change color. And that just, you know, just the way they grow.
You want to say that again, what the 3 bags are?
Okay, so the first bag is, that's the first bag. That's about the when we start to bottom plant the clam. We get them from Ed at 4 to 6 millimeters, and I didn't bring any of those because everything's already grown up. And then those are the second bag is the ones that are like 15%. This is like a growth ratio. I mean, you get faster growers and then obviously the last one is 14 to 16 months. And
So
harvest.
the second bag is the same age as the first bag, but
Right.
those are the fast growers.
Right.
Because of the what?
They're just faster growers. They, you know,
They were happy.
but we're experiencing extremely higher numbers of survival up until the size that, you know, quite frankly, we were out there yesterday and we couldn't find any dead clams. And it was pretty encouraging because we were able to get into this program last year.
That's incredible.
Yeah, these are same age as those. They just have to be, you know, it's just, we sieve them out and then whatever falls through goes back in like this and then,
Oh, I see. It's incredible that we have that much of a difference.
yeah.
What do you attribute the growth difference to?
I'm not
Warmer
a-
water, more sunlight?
No, I don't think there's any difference. When you put 5,000 clams in a bag, they all got the same chance to grow and eat and you'd have to talk to Tyler. No. Everybody's diverting back to Tyler.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, there you go. Don't take any out.
It's ready for some butter and garlic.
Well, thanks a lot. Stick around for the vote. We're going to vote here soon.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We've got one more item.
All right, so as many of you joined recently, we're sent a thing about your My Lagoon story. So we've done stories just sort of highlighting the different members of the committee so the public can get to know them a little better, and we put those out on our site. So if you haven't scheduled yours yet, please contact me, and we need at least a few weeks to schedule it out with our video team. You basically just have to let us know what location a good time for you is, and we'll get that set up, and then they come out and film wherever you tell us to, and we put it together, and we have Mark's here. We'll show you now.
The earliest memory that I have of the Indian River Lagoon would be when I was a kid. We used to go boating out of Port Canaveral quite a bit. And so lots of good memories about that, but one that particularly comes to mind was just a night that I went out with my dad and spent a night on one of the spoil islands there. I wanted to serve on the Oversight Committee just because the lagoon has been such an important part of our life. I grew up around here, was gone for a few years, but I've been back for about 25 years now. And so I've seen a lot of the changes. I know that there is potential for restoration of places like this from work that I've seen in other parts of the country. So I just wanted to be a part of that if I could. I feel like the biggest challenge for the lagoon is going to be maintaining all of the support that's needed to continue the work for as long as it needs to happen. It's a very long-term prospect to restore a lagoon this large, and so that means maintaining public support through funding and working on the projects. We need to make sure that people remain aware of what's happening, understand the benefits of what's already been done, so that we'll have the support we need to keep going. One of the things our family does is we don't use fertilizer and we don't water our lawn. That hasn't been that much of a problem. I know different people have different views about what their yard needs to look like, but we still have green things. And I guess when we get to spend time directly on the lagoon, we also try to be pretty careful about what we do, keeping the boat out of seagrass beds, taking care of the water as much as we can. I think it's important that we protect the lagoon because it means something to all of us. Everybody either likes to play on the lagoon, they have property on the lagoon, they have a business that depends on the lagoon. So we all benefit if we have a healthy lagoon. And, on the environmental side, these are resources that we need to keep, that we depend on, that we don't want to lose.
They make you look pretty good, don't they?
No questions?
Thanks.
Thanks for the invitation.
All right, and any old business? That would be I don't think so. Do we need a vote on old business, or no, we can just move on to new business? Yeah, we've got several new business items. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I'm doing this. This is going off of Ed and Mike's presentation. So it's to consider a motion to reallocate $40,000 from the Central Indian River Lagoon Septic Upgrade Program to the Clam Aquaculture Program to allow clam farmers to apply for up to $6,000 of reimbursement cost share funding. Okay. I could go into the summary if need be, but the clam aquaculture farming was added to the Sorrel Plan in 2021 as a nutrient removal strategy. We had funding for up to 10 farmers. In 2024, we added the inflation adjustments, which changed that cost share up to $68,000, which put us at 11 farmers. We had our 11th farmer, but he just withdrew last month, so we have room for one more, but there is strong interest to expand the program again. And so with the central IRL septic upgrade funding, we have over $16 million allocated in the 2025 plan. To date, we have completed 445 septic upgrade applications. 270 have been completed, and almost $4 million of Sorrel funds have been expended. An additional $4 million of SORL funding has been committed for those remaining 175 applications, leaving over $8 million for future septic upgrades in the central Indian River Lagoon, even after this transfer. That is all I have.
Any comments within the?
So obviously 40,000 relative to the 8 million is pretty small. But the 8 million, is that because there were fewer projects that were ultimately identified or found, or why did that exist based upon the original budget?
So, we analyzed how many septic are in which basin and which are the most cost-effective for septic to sewer, and, how many more priority sites don't fall into a priority septic to sewer. And so we tried to allocate enough money for upgrades to address those priorities. Palm Bay has really, really promoted connections to sewer, and they have also received millions of dollars of state grants to help with septic to sewer conversion. So we're actually achieving more on the septic to sewer side, and so need less left in the septic upgrades to be able to address, the same number of priority sites.
That's great. So if this gets approved, we'll have $7,960,000 for something else.
Well, it would still be for septic upgrades, but yes.
Got it.
Go ahead.
I would presume, you get better nitrogen or greater nitrogen removal with the septic conversion, but it sounds like we get more results quicker by going with the clams, and it's very small percentage of the money, so it sounds like it's a really good way to go.
Potentially. Any more comments? Or we can accept some public comments on this, if there's any. Do I have a motion? You're an alternate, so it's got to be from Laura Lee. You can talk to Laura Lee, say, Laura Lee.
Laura Lee, would you like the motion?
We can accept it from anybody.
I did actually. Yeah, I thought Barbara seconded. I thought we had the motion and it was seconded. Well, it was Nick, I think, because he's the alternate. He was saying he had to recant for Laura Lee. I'll make the motion.
Okay. Okay, did you get that? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
There you go.
Love Laura Lee.
Any opposed? No. Okay, that passes.
Great. Good one.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Good job.
On to the next one.
All right, so I am going to go over the proposed schedule and cost share. So we are going to update the cost share eligibility. I'm going to go over that in this presentation. So in the packet, you were emailed last Friday that included this schedule and cost share eligibility. We are having our meeting today for you to vote on it, and then we would like to post the cost share eligibility for the project applications by August 1st. Then we would have applications due, that portal open for about 2 months with a due date of September 26th. And then during the month after that, staff will review all applications and send that packet to the committee for review. You will have the meeting, the agenda will be sent to you on that Friday, the November 14th, and then we would have the meeting on November 21st to go over all of those projects to be recommended for the 2026 SORL plan. Then in December, you will get the draft 2026 SORL plan sent to you for review. There's potential to cancel the December meeting. And then in January, hopefully you will provide us all your comments, edits between December and January. We will get those implemented before the January meeting, and then you would vote on that January 16th. It has to be posted for 15 days for public review before it's considered at the county commission meeting. We don't yet have the county commission meeting scheduled for next year, but it should be between February 10th or the 24th, tentatively.
Well, folks, this is where the rubber meets the road. And so you can see the schedule here and what we're committing to. So any comments? Any comments from the audience at all? Okay. Do I have a motion?
To approve this.
Okay. A second? Okay. Did you? All in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, folks, this is what we're heading into.
Okay.
Yeah. There you go. That was Barbara and Kimberly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have the cost share.
All right, so the next section is on cost share. So just as a refresher, we've been through quite the path on inflation, and we talked earlier about how that affected the cost of septic to sewer. When we started this program, inflation was a pretty constant 2%, but then post-COVID, things shot up, and now we're hoping that we're trending back down towards stability. But it's made projecting the 10-year revenues for the program very challenging. Nonetheless, you see for the last 3 years, very tight between the county's projections, the state projections, and our actual collections. And our projections have been a bit more accurate than the state's projections when compared to actuals. So zooming in on actuals, you can see, we're just barely below our projections. And we're feeling pretty good about this until a couple weeks ago when the state budget was approved with a bunch of sales tax eliminations and sales tax holidays. And so Terry's listed out these permanent eliminations on gold, silver, platinum, health and safety items, disaster preparedness items, and state park emissions. The business tax rent at the top, that's really the big financial impact to us. There's also the back to school holiday and hunting, fishing, camping tax holidays that have become permanent instead of, up to individual year determinations. And so the state's estimate for the revenue impact on a 1/2-cent sales tax in Brevard is about $2 million a year. All of these will go into effect on October 1st, so we'll have 1/4 of impact during this calendar year and then a full year of impact next year. So about $500,000 this year and then $2 million next year. So that is revenue that we were counting on that now looks like we should not expect. Here's looking at the growth in swirl revenue from 1 year to the next, the percent change from 1 year to the next. So when we take those tax cuts into account for 2025 and 2026, I colored them differently because they're estimates, they're projections, whereas the prior years are actuals. You see the relatively slow growth in our collections. So based on, didn't feel like we could move on the cost share that Swirl provides for new projects. We need to take the funding that we have and use it to the best of our abilities to accomplish the projects that are already promised, already in design, already underway. The big exception is stormwater projects. And so we still have a lot of stormwater basins that we have analyzed. They are priorities to be treated. We've documented them as, high priority loading areas, but nobody has stepped up and said, we'll design a project there, right? Neither county nor cities. So we have a lot of those unclaimed basins, and with costs being so much higher than what the Save Our Lagoon cost share was, we're not having a lot of people step up and say, we have the funding to fund the rest of that project, we'll take it. So we looked at what is the average cost of projects completed to date, and that's at $574. Previously, the committee had us look at, but it costs more on the beaches than on the mainland to build a project. And in prior years, that seemed to hold true. In the more recent data, we just didn't see that. Of course, it's a small data set, but so we just didn't have enough numbers to justify a sliding scale based on location, and that's why we're recommending just the 574 countywide. I think that was our last slide, right? Oh, well, I can talk about legislative appropriation requests. So like I said at the beginning, we did have 2.9 million legislative appropriation approved in this year's budget. The top O'Galley Northeast environmental dredging, that did not make it into the appropriations bill. So I struck through those, made it into the appropriations bill, but were vetoed by the governor. The bottom half of the slide are projects that weren't swirl staff proposals. They're community or city municipal projects that impact the lagoon with, you see, about half of those were also vetoed, but there are significant funds coming in. And the bottom bullet, several years ago, the governor proposed $100 million a year grant program specifically for the Indian River Lagoon. This year, that program was funded at $25 million. So it will be very, very competitive this year. In the past couple years, they've gotten about $200 million worth of proposals each year. So it's going to be a tough year for all of the entities trying to fund projects, especially if the swirl cost share is a lot less than the actual project cost, right? In the past, we've gone to the state, we've gone to grant agencies to try to make up the delta between what a project costs and what the swirl cost share that was available. And this is just going to be, it's going to be very difficult to do that going forward. So go back to the proposed cost share.
And that's what we're voting on, is that. So just any comments?
Yes. I'm new. I'm new to this, and I can understand this, but on the county level to y'all, and understand you get different parties, different people, different times. Does this get swayed by them? Is during the year after it's agreed on, or does it get changed by the county people, the new people? In other words, dredging, they want more dredging, they want more of this or that, and obviously it would affect your budget. So I don't see any of that there, but does that happen? I mean, you're meeting with them, I assume you meet with them a couple times a year on the budget. But I don't know.
So you're talking about the county commission?
Yes.
And the county's budget,
County
right?
commission.
So what happens is we post these cost shares in the applications that the community can use to apply for swirl funding. Mm-hmm. And based on these cost shares, those entities decide whether they want to request project funds or not, whether they want to try to proceed with a project. And they submit applications.
Okay.
We will go through those applications, make sure they're complete, and we will bring them to the committee to review in November.
The committee being the,
This committee,
This
this
committee,
Citizens
okay.
Oversight Committee. You will review those applications and you will make a recommendation as to which ones you want to fund
okay,
in the next plan update, in the 2026 Save Our Indian River Lagoon Plan update. We take that recommendation, we stick it into the plan update along with other text updates, you know, all of the data that we've collected on how projects are performing, right? We bring that to you in an updated plan that you review in December and make a recommendation on in January. Then we take the committee's recommended plan update that includes all those November projects that you recommended. We take that to the county commission in February.
okay.
And I think also, Dick, I think you were also asking about whether we shuffle money around in the year also.
Yeah.
I think that's what he was really asking about.
So there's very little shuffling during the year.
Yes.
There are specific projects that come forward and say, you know, we thought it was going to cost this much. We had all these other funding sources. We went out to bid and it came in, you know, 7% over. Can you approve contingency funds for
Okay,
that?
got it,
And so, you know, based on the dollar value of that request, it can either be done by staff or it comes to the committee or it comes to the committee and then has to be confirmed by the county commission. So,
Okay, so
you do see those adjustments during the year.
Okay, that's during the year also.
Yes, there's another thing that adjusts during the year is, you know, we get grants, the municipalities get grants, so those changes also happen. They don't affect the plan, they don't affect the amount of Save Our Lagoon funding. They are reflected, we try to get that information from everybody and incorporate it into table 6-9 that shows the total costs so that you see, so that everybody can see what the total costs were compared to what the Save Our Lagoon program funded.
Okay, and that's why you showed me on the budget that you didn't put that in there. I understand now.
Just a minute, Fred. Yeah, we are approaching the time here, so if we're going to continue, we need to vote on continuing for a period of time. Does anybody have any comments on continuing until we get done?
We're almost there, right?
We're almost there, yeah, but we've got comments from the audience and we've got a few other things to go on, so I'd say it might go on for another 15 minutes to a half an hour. So if you give us another half hour, I think it'll be enough. Any comments on that? Do we have a first and a second? Laura Lee? First and seconds, there you go, Barbara and Kimberly.
A motion to extend up to.
Yes, to extend until, another half hour or so. Okay, all right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Yep, okay, we'll continue on. There you go, there's Laura Lee's aye.
A quick question, when I was reading through this earlier, I saw, okay, so we had a cost share, which you've now explained, and we didn't even want to buy it. So we've essentially bumped the cost share up to what the total project cost would be on average that we would just fund it on. Okay, that makes sense.
Done. But if I could just add, I know previously you had staff make an amazing report on grant contributions across the board. I don't know if that's been updated or if that was like a one and done.
So quarterly, there's a grant update, so next month you'll get the next quarterly update. Right now, we're at about 110 million in grants total that the county has received, and then the cities also have their grants.
And I know when you mentioned that 25 million this year from coming out of the governor, it's obviously much more competitive if you said 200 in the past. So we've historically received grants through that program. So that could again offset and leave more available dollars. So maybe a little blurb when you do the presentation or whoever does that presentation, just as an explanation. Again, very brief, just if that's possible and relevant to include in, that would be great, just for the new members to see how that does work and what we do.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay.
Briefly. So I noticed that the stormwater cost share proposal is increasing, and the other ones are all flat, it looks like.
Yeah.
Is there a plan to have the cost share dollar value inflate comparatively to CPI or something like that? Because if you never do that, then the cost share value to the recipient is diminished year over year.
Right. So each year we do look at inflation, and we do increase the amount that was approved. So if an amount was approved in 2020, but it hasn't been, it's being constructed now in 2025, we would look at what was inflation in 21, 22, 23, 24.
If like so many things in Sorrel, we're measuring dollars to value of nutrient reduction or environmental enhancement. This is, and these cost shares are dollars per, in this case, nitrogen. Then that makes a lot of sense if we would inflate each project value, because the recipient is looking at it from their perspective of how many, in this case, pounds of nitrogen can I reduce and what kind of contribution can I get. So it would make sense to inflate those dollar values here per dollar of value to the environment, rather than just total value of the fund.
And that is looked at in general every time, but this is just specifically for this one part of the plan this time.
Right. And the other question was, do we put any caps on individual projects, or do we tier them for prioritization on environmental value add per dollar or per nitrogen?
So these are those caps as far as what's the Save Our Lagoon program.
No, I'm saying, so if I had a project that was going to reduce 1,000 pounds of nitrogen per year versus another project that had 100, is there any cap to that, or because you can get a lot of value out of maybe many 100s, and then
Right, right.
So there's no cap on the scale of projects?
No. So
Okay.
you see, we have some 20, 30, 40 million.
We're looking for another motion in a second. Do we have you teaming up again?
You make a motion. I'm trying to. Are we moving just to vote in acceptance of as presented?
In this, yes. As presented, yes.
So I move that we accept the proposed cost share as presented.
Yes. Okay.
Second.
Well, no, they've already
No,
done
they already
that. So we're going to vote for it, yeah. All right, so now you can vote. All right, all in favor? Anybody opposed to it? All right, you're canceled out.
Don, you need to take public comment before you do the vote, too.
We did. We did. Did we have one more? I thought we had one more.
General public comment.
Oh, that's it? Okay. All right, we have a couple of public comments, one from Craig Wallace.
Good morning, almost noon. Craig Wallace, I'm the chair of the Brevard Indian River Lagoon Coalition. So what is the Brevard Indian River Lagoon Coalition? Some of the new members might ask. So I'm going to unveil our new membership t-shirt here.
Nice.
But this is really our story. We're trying to protect this. That's what we all want to do, right? Well, here's the story of how the coalition kind of fits in that. At the top here in the fine print that you can't really read, it says education, collaboration, and action. We just added that action word, and there's a reason for that. Because a lot of people say, well, you've got all these organizations like Marine Resources Council, Keep Brevard Beautiful, all these different organizations that are already doing stuff in the lagoon. Well, what are you guys doing? Well, we're kind of like the behind-the-scenes organization. We're not scientists per se. I mean, I'm an electrical engineer, but I'm not a marine scientist. So I asked Virginia, the first I met her about 9 years ago, I think, I said, what can we do? What can I do as a citizen? I don't have a marine sciences degree. So I think I finally figured it out. and this was a long process. I joined the coalition about 4 or 5 years ago. And so what the coalition really does, the education part we kind of do in our Straight Talk events, which most of you have probably attended. It's basically we bring scientists in, they give a kind of a quick speech, and then we allow the public that are attending these events to ask questions. So that's a big part of what we do education-wise. But the other part is the behind-the-scenes part, and that is getting people to speak up, like basically what I'm doing, and I do at commission meetings. And it's not the easiest thing for the general citizens to do. So we spend a little time trying to help them speak up and teach them how to do that. So a good example was, I don't know whether anybody listened to or watched the commission meeting last Tuesday, but we had a group of 5 people from the Lake Shepherd area, which is part of the Grand Canal dredging project, which has been going on and on and on. So the board basically had to vote on, how long do we want to continue this on, or do we want to continue it on? So there were a couple options, but basically the people that live around Lake Shepherd, and Lake Shepherd is like a 20-acre lake, and it's basically a dredged area. It was a big canal, let's put it that way. And so, so when they heard that possibly their lake might not get dredged, their lake goes from like 10 feet deep to like 30 feet deep, muck everywhere. I'm sorry, if I could continue on. This is kind of a good story I think you'll appreciate. So anyway, once they found out that there was a potential of not actually dredging their lake out, which had been really noxious, they said, what do I do? So I said, well, you call or email your commissioner and tell them you want it dredged. And so they started talking amongst each other. There's about 36 homes around Lake Shepherd. And all of a sudden, I started getting these calls from all these people saying, well, what can we do? How can we do this? So we got together, and 5 of them decided that they would like to speak before the commission. And so we sat down with them and said, well, the best way to speak is to tell a story. So I said, make your story short, which mine is not today, I'm sorry. But we said, keep it to a minute. If you can do it in a minute, then that's really impactful. But make it a story that's, kind of from the heart. And this was an emotional thing for me, because just seeing these people get up there and speak and really tell their story, and boy, did the commission respond. 5-0 vote to continue this program, and it is basically, which Virginia spoke of earlier, it's going to terminate at the end of November, but Lake Shepherd is going to be in there, and it is going to get done. As a matter of fact, they're starting to get the pipe down the canal now to do that. So that's what we do. That's what we try to engage people to get up and speak for themselves. That's the most powerful thing you can do in government. So that's my story. And if anybody's interested, the newcomers, these are our flyers that we basically hand out to people that educate the community on what it is this program is doing and other programs to try to support the lagoon. And we do spend a fair amount of time in commissioners' offices too. So, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Craig.
Yeah, sure.
Don't you have an event coming up here in the near future?
Yeah, Laura Lee, you want to talk about that? So we do a number of events, but the next one that we have, official, more like a Straight Talk event, is going to be at Laura Lee's restaurant in Titusville on October, I think it's 2nd, 4th. It's on our website. Our website is helpthelagoon.org. You can find it all on there. This is going to be kind of more like oriented towards the fishermen in the community. So it's a little bit different because that's what Laura Lee does. Thank you. Second. Thank you. October 2nd. So, but we'll have more after that, and we'll be probably doing a lot more next year, but thank you for asking. Okay, thank you.
Greg. And I have Ashley Van Dyke.
I was going to say good morning, but I guess good afternoon. So I just want to introduce myself. I know we are limited on time, but my name is Ashley Van Dyke. I'm here representing Tequesta Harbor. We are a neighborhood on Merritt Island, just south of Honeymoon Lake, north of Pineda Causeway. And we are unfortunately here to introduce ourselves and to ask for some help. So not long ago, my husband and I moved into the neighborhood, but we have talked to the longstanding residents, and our harbor was kind of a safe haven for manatees, lots of fish, and it was a vibrant ecosystem when the neighborhood was first built. However, after years and years and years of sediment buildup, the decline of the Indian River Lagoon, and I'd say maybe a little bit of neglect on the neighborhood's part, we are in desperate need of some help, guidance, and potential funding to help a restoration project for our little harbor. We have 26 homes in our neighborhood. We are looking to do, obviously, a full dredge. We are looking at, on average, about a foot to maybe 2 feet of water in our entire harbor. We are estimating anywhere between 4 and 6 feet of muck has built up in our harbor, making it completely unusable if the water level is down. We have done, as a neighborhood, a couple different things in the last 5 years. We've had baffle boxes installed for stormwater. We've had aerators installed. Those things seem to be helping, but it's not alleviating the issues that we're having. And at this point, we are here to seek guidance, support, and possible funding so that we could take care of this little piece of the Indian River Lagoon that then obviously feeds into the larger ecosystem. The other thing that's happening in our neighborhood is we are seeing large and soon to be larger turnover, we believe, of the families, and we have a lot of young families with children and everything moving into the neighborhood. And we think it would be a great opportunity to partner with different organizations, maybe see if we could do some fun and cool opportunities, studies, or things like that in the harbor to try to build some community involvement and educate the youth that's moving into the area. So really, this is just kind of a plea for some support and some help, maybe some guidance, some names, numbers, for things that we could possibly do.
Have you engaged Abby at all?
So I'm honestly new to the area, so I am learning everybody, who I can call and reach out to. So I would love to meet anybody, get names, numbers, contacts. I'll take you out for coffee.
Well, she could give you the reality of dredging and all the costs and everything. We did approve a small project last year.
Yeah, so that's actually why I'm here, because I have found out all about all the small projects, and we are relatively about the same size as that harbor down, I believe it's in Satellite Beach.
It's further south than that.
And we actually are in a unique position that the cost to dredge our harbor might be significantly cheaper than theirs, because you're able to access about, I'm estimating about 70% of our harbor from the shore. So we don't, actually the cost to apparently dredge from the shore is a lot cheaper than dredging from a barge. So we're hoping that maybe, I understand funds might be limited or not even possible, but again, any guidance would be great.
I think you can set up with Abby.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be wonderful.
Get the reality.
What was the name of the location again?
Tequesta Harbor. Yeah, so we're south of, we're like right in the middle of like Honeymoon Lake and Pineda, sort of. Perfect. Thank you for your time.
All right, comments from the committee and all, and yes.
I have a brief one. I'd just like to point out and highlight one of the upcoming volunteer events that was on our list. The Keep of Our Beautiful Summer Series ends A week from tomorrow, July 26th on Saturday, it says MIMS, but it's actually going to be up at the Hall over Canal. We'll have kayaks that have been donated. The Orlando Pride is coming over as a volunteer and sponsor to help with this, so it's getting attention not just here in Brevard County, but our program, not Keep Brevard Beautifuls, but the Lagoon and the program, the things that we're doing to improve it are getting attention over in Orlando for some pretty major organizations. We have collected thousands of pounds of trash so far this summer, and this is the final series, so I would encourage anyone who wants to get out there and actually roll up your sleeves. It's going to be a great event, and I'd recommend you come.
And that's a great place to see seagrasses too, is up in that area.
And manatees.
Tons of manatees and dolphins now.
Yeah,
What's
yeah.
the date on that?
It's July the 26th, Saturday.
And I just have a comment. I got a call from Nick about an email from me. It wasn't from me, and I want you to all know that you will not ever get an email. Mark might get an email from me, but no one else on the committee will get an email from me. So just know that it'll be spam.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all our names and numbers and everything are out there as a committee, so, you know, it can't be prevented.
I got one to jump off that. The summer series is, the KBB is kind of part of that. And then also the Treasure Coast Waterway Cleanup, but it extends across the lagoon. There's lots of organizations also on the 26th. And then on October 18th, the Indian River Lagoon Day event will be happening at Front Street Park again. And we just kind of have our official date for that. So I hope to see you all out there in one way, shape, form, or another. And you're invited to come out to Front Street Park to enjoy Indian River Lagoon Day with the city of Melbourne. It should be a lot of fun.
Any additional comments? If not, we'll adjourn here. We got 10 minutes. Thank you.
Wait.
From the blue. All right, go ahead. Go ahead, Laura Lee.
Can I speak? Okay, I have two things. First of all, if you haven't been up to Titusville to see the breakwater and shoreline restoration project on the south side of the causeway, it is a spectacular project. And I want to thank, I don't know how Virginia did it, but I asked for a fence, to be put up after the construction fence went down, out of terrified fear of what was going to happen to the hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of vegetation that Sorrel financed for the project. And the fence is there, and it's wonderful. I keep getting asked by people, are they allowed to walk along the beach inside the fence? What am I supposed to tell them? Are people allowed to walk on the beach inside the fence, Virginia?
I believe so. They just can't trample the plants.
So we need somebody there all the time, Laura Lee.
Yeah. Yeah. And the credit goes to Carolina.
Okay. The second thing I have is from the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council's Habitat and Ecosystem Advisory Panel. They met this week. Last year, Daniel Kolodny from the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program traveled up to Charleston to do a presentation on the state of the Indian River Lagoon. He was invited up after several years of hearing from me about the condition of the lagoon, how that was impacting offshore fisheries, and they needed to pay attention. So Daniel came up and did a brilliant job of explaining what was going on here in the Indian River Lagoon. And following his presentation during public comment, I drove up too. During public comment, I pointed out that a policy that they have called the Alterations to the Riverine, Estuarine, and Nearshore Flows Policy for the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council. This is a freshwater input policy. the word stormwater did not appear in that policy at all, zero. And so I explained to them what has happened to the Indian River Lagoon because of stormwater. And the committee jumped on it. They liked, what I said. They all agreed that stormwater should be included in that policy. They took it to the main council members. They agreed that stormwater should be added to the freshwater inflows policy. And now the Habitat and Ecosystem AP is challenged with adding language to that policy regarding stormwater. And the tape of that discussion, the video will be out eventually, but staff has to look at it, the lawyers have to look at it, and then it becomes public property. And I can get that to Virginia, but I asked Kathleen Howington if they would be interested in, seeing what the Sorrel Committee and staff has done with stormwater. The naivety of the questions that the panel members posed indicates that they don't have a lot of knowledge about stormwater up in Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. They are 10 to 20 years behind where we are from stormwater impacts to their estuarine systems up there. But when I talk to some of their commercial fishermen who are on the water all the time, they are very concerned about the degradation of water quality that's taking place to our north, and they're convinced that it is partially being driven by stormwater. And so Kathleen Howington, who's the lead scientist for the Habitat Committee, would very much like to talk to Virginia. And so is it okay if I give her your contact information? And would we be able to help them understand what language needs to be added to their freshwater input policy?
Yes, of course. We're happy to help.
Great. They will be ecstatic. Thank you.
Hey, Donnie, one more. Just
Okay.
real quick. Want to thank Virginia and the team for setting up that volunteer opportunity that Laura Lee mentioned, and thanks to Fred for getting some great video of it and sharing it, and Don and everyone who showed up. That was really a great event. It was a lot of fun to be a part of, and thank
Yeah.
you so much for putting that on.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Thanks a lot, yeah.
Planting seagrass.
Yes.
Yes.
At that same site that,
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I was there. I don't know. I haven't seen the video.
I thought in one of our videos we saw
Oh,
today.
yeah, the
Oh,
clam
yeah.
video.
That was,
Yeah. All right,
Thanks,
we're
Donnie.
done here.
Great.
Give you a motion to
Thank
adjourn.
you. No, we don't need a motion. We're done.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.